So this video is a follow-up to this video where I detail how to beat every Tera raid ever, and here I'm going to be detailing some specific sets for Pokemon trying to fulfill Tera raid roles, again detailed in this video. So I'm going to try and organize it where first I'll be going over notable attackers of each type, and then some healers to help out those attackers, followed by the different types of supporters. But before I get started with any of that, I do want to mention that in the previous video I mentioned the standby role as a last resort pick for any players who don't have the ability to train Pokemon, and the best standby Pokemon hands down has to be Fortress. If you head to this area in the northwest corner of the map, you can just find Fortress everywhere, and they shouldn't be too hard to catch. Fortress has the advantages of learning Protect naturally and having the ability Sturdy, which means that it will take a very long time to get knocked out, allowing the other players who have trained Pokemon to beat the Tera raid fast enough before the time runs down. You can also use these moves in between the Protect turns whenever your Sturdy ability is going to activate to help out a bit more. But again, this is a last resort option for if you haven't beaten the game or maybe have a few hours of playtime after beating it. So with that out of the way, let's move on to the attackers. All of these attackers have something that only they can do, or some sort of notable niche that allows them to excel where other attackers may fail. The order of these Pokemon from best to worst will be a ranking from S to C, and we aren't discussing the Ds because of time restraints. If a Pokemon isn't on this list, it's because 90% of the time there is an attacker that does its job better. And before anyone comments like, "Why didn't you put Slowbro in fire types? Don't you know it can learn Flamethrower, you dum-dum?" Well, first of all, how dare you speak to me that way? And secondly, if I went over every coverage move each Pokemon gets, it would easily quadruple the length of this video, so I'm not going to do that. The 5 categories that I'm going to be analyzing for different Tera raid attackers are their movesets, their defenses, their offenses, their team synergy, and the X factor, which is something that's important to the Pokemon, but it's kind of hard to define with the other 4 categories. Mixed types. Starting off our mixed attackers, we have Arceus, the god Pokemon. Arceus is really good because it gets Judgment, and then if you hold like a different plate, say for example you want like water damage for whatever reason, you can just grab the splash plate, and now you have a water Arceus for dealing damage into like fire, rock, and ground. It's pretty good to just like build a stellar Arceus and have one of those sitting around. You can use Judgment, you can use Acid Spray to lower special defense. Your only recovery is going to be through Recover, however, so that is one important thing to consider. And you have a very, very wide move pool of other supporting moves. It's just that in order to use them, you have to take off one of these 4 moves, so it's important to consider what you're going to use. Like for example, say you want to fight a Pokemon that's actually a physical attacker, you could swap Calm Mind out for Iron Defense, but now you don't have a way to boost your special attack, you only have a way to decrease your opponent's special defense. But for all of the good stats that I have, Arceus is a pretty easy S grade overall. I would definitely recommend getting one if you can. We're also going to bunch all the evolutions together here. These are like the good evolutions. You really don't see Sylveon, Leafeon, and Glaceon being used very much because they all have different types that kind of outclass them. However, each 5 of these evolutions have something that they do pretty notably in their types, especially Vaporeon. Vaporeon's pretty common to see in 7-star Tera raid builds because of its water absorbability and the fact that 1/3 of all starters are water types, give or take a Pikachu or an Eevee. Vaporeon's very valuable because if you're using a Tera type like Fire, that means that you can resist Grass, Fire, and Water all at the same time, and you have a lot of really good moves in order to support Vaporeon and make sure that over time it is a really good end game attacker, especially if you're using like Weather Ball whenever you've got also like Sunny Day. It means that can be very hard for the water type starters in order to try and remove Vaporeon. And all of these things go into making Vaporeon like an S tier attacker, I would say. Moving on to Espeon and Umbreon, they give up some of the advantages of Vaporeon, with Psychic and Dark not having as many good resistances as Water. And their movesets are also more limited in the fact that this is pretty much what you would run on both Espeon and Umbreon. However, it is interesting to note that they're both pretty similar to each other, but the slight way that they would play differently is that Draining Kiss is a healing move for Espeon, and you can Magic Bounce back status moves that might be sent towards you, And for Umbreon, you could use a foul play strategy. So if you're fighting like a special attacker, you could use moves such as Swagger to raise the Tera Raid Pokemon's attack in order to deal more foul play damage over time, and that boost won't be wiped by the Tera Raid boss Pokemon itself because it doesn't wipe positive stat boost. But yeah, Espeon and Umbreon, coming into a grade of an A, which is still pretty good, but not the top of the class like Vaporeon is. Flareon is notable because it, again, functions more similar to Vaporeon than Espeon and Umbreon. However, Flareon just doesn't have as much of a useful move pool as Vaporeon does, and this is probably still the best that you can get if you sub out a few of your moves, but still definitely like a solid B fire type overall from Flareon here. And lastly, Jolteon is really only here because there's an extra slot on the team list. But Voltazorb does have its perks. It's just that Jolteon feels like much more frail than all of the other ones here because Jolteon really doesn't have that great of resistances that wouldn't be used by like some other type. And it's for that reason that Jolteon is like just a smidge under Flareon at like a C grade. And as for the Tauros forms, you normally wouldn't use them. However, the main thing that makes Tauros worth mentioning is its Anger Point ability. If you take a lot of attacks during a Tera Raid, there is a decent chance that you will get crit and activate Tauros' Anger Point. This is one of the main ways that we beat Samurott Raid, because Samurott would just go for Focus Energy and a bunch of moves that would make it guaranteed to crit, so we would counter with Anger Point Tauros and Sunny Day to make sure that it didn't take too much water type damage. But Anger Point Tauros can be pretty funny as well as all the other Anger Point Pokemon, and the main two ones that you would be using are Fire and Water, and then fighting in Normal's probably not even worth mentioning, but it is here. Water and Fire get the grades of being at least a B, while the other two forms are C's or less.
Again, in the mixed category, we have all the Ogerpons here, and straight up the best Ogerpon is definitely Grass Ogerpon. With Grass Ogerpon, we get the Horn Leech, and Horn Leech is very valuable as all healing moves are, but then you could also have the Sword Stance to increase your damage, and Synthesis to heal yourself, and the Focus Energy, as well as you could use Ivy Cudgel if you give yourself a Shell Bell if you want to heal up that way. And all of these things make Ogerpon like an extremely high B, and you can maybe even argue that it's an A tier. However, if we look at the other Ogerpons, the main downside of running these Ogerpons is that they all have to wear their mask, which does give them a damage boost. However, it is less consistent healing than just using your grass type damage with Horn Leech. You could use these different forms if you want to have different defensive types, but if you're going to use the rock, fire, or water forms, each for their respective cudgels, it's not really worth it because there are better attackers, each of their own types, that can sustain themselves a little bit better than just having to go for synthesis over and over again. And there is some merit to their normal abilities of like Water Absorb, Mold Breaker, and Sturdy. However, when you Terrastalize, you're going to be changing those abilities. But yeah, Grass Ogerpon is definitely the way to go because you're Terra Grass and you click Horn Leech, and that usually can do the job. Next up we have Mew. Mew learns every single TM in the game and is also a mythical, so we're already starting off really good with a really wide moveset. The main moveset that we used to beat Mewtwo was just Mew with like Leech Life, Life Dew, Coaching, and then your Light Screen in order to get up your defensive stuff. But Mew has so many moves that you're just gonna have to trust me that there's a lot of them here, and it would take me a long time to go over every single optimal one, and all the other moves are gonna be on the other Pokemon, so if you're looking for something, just search whether or not Mew has it, and it probably does. But yeah, all of this definitely makes Mew a super easy S tier. Great Pokemon overall. Moving on to Necrozma, I wasn't really quite sure where to put Necrozma. You can definitely argue that I could just put it in Psychic because it deals Psychic damage, but we are going to discuss Lunala and Solgaleo at their different points whenever they come up. But talking about just Necrozma, Necrozma does have some pretty interesting things that it can do, mainly just with Photon Geyser. You can make it either use your physical or special attack stat, depending on whether you're the Calm Mind set or the Sword Stance set. Sword Stance will give you more attack faster, but your Calm Mind will also give you your special defense boost while increasing your special attack slower, so that's a bit of a trade-off there, and you also have 2 different healing moves in case you need either of those. But Prism Armor can be very handy if you're fighting a Pokemon that is weak to Psychic, but has a move to hit Psychic types back. And then Necrozma Dawn Wings form and Necrozma Duskbane form pretty much do the same thing that Solgaleo and Lunala do with each of their respective signature moves. It's just that you have Prism Armor instead of having the Lunala and Solgaleo abilities. But overall for Necrozma, I would definitely give Necrozma a high A. Fire types! So starting off fire types, we have Skeledirge, and Skeledirge is really strong because of its signature move Torch Song, which allows it to raise its special attack every time it hits its move, and this in combination with the item Shell Bell allows it to not only deal more damage over time, but to also heal itself over time for greater amounts of health. And Fire Ghost is a really good defensive typing as it gives you 2 immunities with the Ghost type, and also fires a decent defense type in and of itself, but your main defensive tool is going to be Unaware, which makes you immune to stat changes and was our main tool of getting around Meganium, who would just click Curse 6 times and be at +6 defense and offense. However, with Unaware, it is worth noting that if your teammates are going for stat dropping things like with Breaking Swipe or Snarl, that you're not going to be able to take advantage of those, and that's why I don't have Snarl in Skeledirge's natural move pool here. But the benefit of ignoring stat boost is definitely makes Unaware the ability to use here. Easy S tier for Skeledirge. If you're looking for fire type damage, I would definitely build a Skeledirge. Speaking of great fire types, we also have Cerulege. Cerulege's Bitter Blade is the only fire type healing move in the game, and the fact that it's even 90 base power is still really good. Cerulege has ways to support itself, like Bulk Up for playing physically defensive and Light Screen for playing specially defensive, as well as the Reflect. As well as you could just go for the physical damage option with Sword Stance, and you do get the tech move of Clear Smog just in case there's any stat boost that comes out from your opponent. But all of this makes Cerulege another easy S tier fire type Pokemon. Very, very good Pokemon here again. Next up we have Iron Moth. Now Iron Moth you can really use for fire or poison damage, so it is going to be mentioned in both. But Iron Moth has Acid Spray, and it's honestly hard to give anything that has Acid Spray less than an A tier. But in combination with Fiery Dance giving you a special attack boost 50% of the time, not being as good as Torch Song, but still really good. Using Acid Spray to lower special defense, I mean, these are going to be your 2 main moves that you go between if you're running an Iron Moth. You also have the Electric Terrain in order to activate your Quark Drive and keep you awake if that's a problem. You have a Lunge or Struggle Bug depending on whichever opponent you're facing, whether they're using physical or special. And you do have the Light Screen, but I assume that you don't have the Reflect. Yeah, you don't have the Reflect, but Light Screen is still really good. So as long as you're positioning your Iron Moth correctly, this is another easy S tier Pokemon overall. Just spam Fire Dance, spam Acid Spray. You'll be good most of the time. Moving on to Gouging Fire, we do have a lot of interesting tools on Gouging Fire. Like signature move Burning Bulwark can be very good for dealing with physical attackers that have a lot of contact moves because you can just burn them through their Tera Shield, which is very valuable. But also the combination of Sunny Day and your ability and being able to go for Morning Sun means that you have a lot of recovery options. And Heat Crash can deal a lot of damage if you're dealing with something that's very small, but you'll have to swap out Temper Flare if what you're fighting is very big. You have some really good supporting tech moves like Howl, Breaking Swipe, Snarl, and Dragon Cheer being a dragon, and you can even go for Rest. I will admit, originally I wanted to give Gouging Fire a grade of A. However, based on the bars in the top right corner, it does barely just sneak into being an S, and depending on how you wiggle the bars, it could be considered an A, but we're gonna give this guy an S at least for now. Now, the main reason that you would use a Volcarona is, again, Fiery Dance, being able to raise your special attack 50% of the time, and then you also have Quiver Dance, which is a very strong move because it increases your special attack and special defense at the same time. And you have a good number of defensive options here, and you get both stat dropping in Lunge and Struggle Bug. And with your Flame Body ability, you have a pretty decent chance at getting a burn on a physical attacker, with it being 30% chance every time something attacks you. And all of this is enough to make Volcarona a low A grade, but the bug typing is usually a hindrance, but it can help in some niche scenarios, and that's the main reason that it's a low A. With Armarouge, you do get the Acid Spray, which is one of the main reasons for running
Armarouge, and you do have some other pretty nifty tools like Clear Smog, like Sarah Ledge had, and you have Mystical Fire for stat dropping. But you also get your screens, and you even get Wide Guard in order to help protect the party, which can be very helpful in some scenarios. And with your ability to Calm Mind to increase your special attack, this is definitely one of the lower Acid Spray Pokemon, but again, it's an Acid Spray Pokemon, which is hard to give anything less than an A, even if it is a low A. Now, Ho-Oh is an interesting one. I was never really quite sure what to do with Ho-Oh, but looking at its moveset, the main thing that you're going to be using Ho-Oh for is the Sacred Fire, and the fact that you can 50% of the time burn with one Sacred Fire if you're using multiple Sacred Fires, even if it is kind of low PP, which makes it hard to do consistent damage with Ho-Oh. It's still pretty good, and you have a lot of defensive options like Recover, Life Dew, Safeguard, and then your dual screens. But since your abilities are kind of useless, this is like just barely enough to make Ho-Oh like a solid B. I wouldn't really consider Ho-Oh for fire type damage that much, but it does have a lot of good options, making it again a solid B overall. But looking at Reshiram has a lot of the same problems as Ho-Oh, but just kind of worse because it doesn't have any healing moves. If you're comparing Reshiram with Gouging Fire, you do get two better fire type attacks just because of the raw base power that they have, and you have screens which Gouging Fire doesn't have, but other than that, there's really not much reason to run Reshiram over just using Gouging Fire. So as much as I love Gen 5, we're just gonna kinda have to give Reshiram a C grade here. And Fernape is a bit of a unique case because Iron Fist Fire Punch seems pretty good on the surface, and you have the Drain Punch not to deal fire type damage, but to help sustain yourself with the help of Slack Off. So if you can get up your Sword Stance or your Bulk Up, you're doing like pretty decent damage. However, your defenses do betray you here a little bit, as there's not much that Infernape can really do in order to keep up with the other fire type attackers in terms of defense. So I would like to place Infernape higher, however, because of the better options that exist in fire types, we're just gonna place it here at a C. So I was scrolling back over fire types, and I think I've discussed all the fire types that I want to discuss at this point. However, one that did stick out is Camerupt. Like, just barely stands out. It does have that anger point that we talked about before, and you also have the ability Solid Rock if you don't want to be anger point, which Solid Rock can be handy in some scenarios if you can get off your Tera fast enough. And you do have a lot of interesting moves on Camerupt, but it has that Gouging Fire problem of not really having a great fire type move to attack with. But all of these options, even if you could maybe extend one of the bars up in the top right corner by another peg or so, but again, that really only adds up to being around a C grade or so, so we're gonna give Camerupt a C and we're gonna move on with our lives.
Grass types. So starting off grass types here, we have Superior, and I can't think of a better grass type than Superior in Tera raids, mainly because your combination of your Contrary ability and Leaf Storm, which raises your special attack by 2 with Contrary, goes absolutely insane. And this is something that can be said about every mon with Contrary in the game, but if you give them Stellar Tera and use Tera Blast, it will increase your special attack and attack every turn, while also being super effective against every single Tera raid. And then you also have the Giga Drain just in case your Shell Bell isn't restoring enough of your health. You can go for the very safe Giga Drain option, as well as Taunt to get rid of any status moves that the boss Tera might be using. You also get your dual screens with Superior, which is a really nice option for team support, as well as also getting the Breaking Swipe to lower your opponent's attack. And then you even have an interesting tech move here with Gastro Acid, where you can negate the opposing Tera Pokemon's ability, which can be very helpful in a lot of scenarios. But all of this makes Superior just an easy S tier, top of the grass types in my opinion. So the thing about Sinistcha that makes it really valuable is that it has its own exclusive move called Matcha Gotcha, which allows it to heal itself for 50% of the damage, and can also burn through Terra Shield, which is very handy. And then you have a lot of great support moves like Nasty Plot to increase your damage. You can Strength Sap to not only get health back, but also lower the attack. You have Life Dew for team support, and then you have the Reflect and the Calm Mind to if you want to swap out Nasty Plot, you can use Calm Mind. Heat Proof is a good ability just in case you're fighting something that does have a fire attack but is weak to grass. So yeah, another S tier Pokemon here. So another top tier grass type that we have here is Hydrapple. You're not getting any use out of any of your abilities, but your moveset combined with your defensive typing is very good. We've got a large variety of moves. You do have the Pollen Puff to side heal some teammates during Tera Raid battles, and then you also have the Recycle in order to help get your berry back in case that ever comes up, and you can combine that with a bunch of different other items if you want to try it, but you'd mainly be recycling berries. So yeah, another super solid defensive type mon, S tier Pokemon.
A bit of a step down from Hydrapple, we have Appleton, but don't get me wrong, Appleton is still very good. Appleton's signature move that allows it to pretty much be like half of an acid spray to lower special defense is still really, really good in Tera raids because it allows you to drop special defense through Tera Shield, as well as also dealing like very considerable grass type damage. You have a lot of similar moves to Hydrapple with like the Recover and the Recycle, but this time around we have Amnesia and Iron Defense as our two defensive boosting moves, and we also have the dual screens, and you can use Giga Drain if you're not getting enough healing from your combination of Apple Acid and Recover, but this is what you would want to stick with most of the time, I think. You also have a more useful ability, which is that your ability doubles the effect of berries that you eat, so that means that your Recycle is going to be a little bit more useful, and you can also swap to Thick Fat. So yeah, Appleton is going to be ranking at an A tier. Relative to grass types, it's definitely an A tier, but relative to Pokemon as a whole, you could probably argue that this is an S tier Pokemon. We're going to talk about Vileplume and Blossom at the same time because they're both pretty comparable. Starting off with Vileplume here, we do have the Giga Drain, who would expect it. But we also have the Strength Step and the Moonlight for healing ourselves, and Strength Step can be used for decreasing damage. And we have the Acid Spray, and we all love Acid Spray. Not to mention your ability can pop up sometimes, and it's pretty handy. And then with Blossom, we trade off the Acid Spray for the Quiver Dance, and Quiver Dance is still very useful. Instead of Effect Spore, we have Healer, which plays a more defensive role for your team synergy. But for both of these, easy A tiers. Looking at Chestnut here, Chestnut is going to be your premier belly drum grass type. You're really not going to be taking too much damage with Chestnut, and getting off the belly drum is pretty safe, so you can run a Shell Bell and then just click Seed Bomb into everything. As well as you also have the Reflect, just in case you want to go for that before the belly drum. You can Synthesis after the belly drum to get all of your health back. As well as you do have some good tech moves like Coaching and Mud Slap, which gives you a decent bit of team synergy, but not too much. And then sometimes you can swap in Drain Punch here. We will talk about Drain Punch whenever fighting types come up, but you can have it on your grass type set just in case after the belly drum you need to get some more health recovery before you start going for super effective damage. Also, Bulletproof is pretty good. It was very useful during Tera Venusaur raids because Venusaur is Sludge Bomb, and Sludge Bomb is blocked by Bulletproof. So let's give it an A grade. Now, Trevenant is an interesting case here because this is another case where it's like S tier in terms of all Pokemon, but only like A tier in terms of all grass types. I guess I'll just leave the A tier there. Like, you've got the Horn Leech, which is very good physical damage and also heals you, which we'd love to see. You have the Skitter Smack options for lowering special attack, and you have the Will-O-Wisp for lowering physical attack, as well as the Reflect, which we also love to see. As well as you have some very interesting tech moves in Skill Swap if you want to trade away, like a Natural Cure. You don't really want to trade away Harvest ever, but Natural Cure you could definitely see you trading away. You also have your own tech move, which is Force Curse, which adds Grass type to any target. This can be very good defensively. I know we're using it a good bit right now for Sceptile raids. And then you also have Curse. Just make sure that you Terastallize into a grass type before you start going for Curse, because losing half your health isn't great. But with Curse to increase your attack and defense once you're a pure grass type, you're going to be doing more damage with Horn Leech. And then Harvest is a really good ability just because 50% of the time you're going to be healing yourself for a free quarter as long as you're under half health, so you can even store that free quarter of health with the Citrus Berry. So Ludicolo is a bit of an interesting case here. We don't have much in terms of move pool, but we have enough in terms of just Seeds Bomb, Sword Stance, and Synthesis, and the Drain Punch just in case we need to get a little bit of extra healing. But we also have Rain Dish, which can be helpful if, for whatever reason, you're using Rain. But you also have Rain Dish, which is not a useless ability, but doesn't come up very much. But all of this is enough to make Ludicolo at least like a pretty decent B tier. Now, Torterra has a lot of really good defensive tools, main one being Shell Armor, which if you're getting hit like 20 times in a raid, one crit can be the difference maker, so if you're stockpiling and you don't have the ability to be crit, it's super safe damage reduction for Torterra. However, other than that, Torterra doesn't really do much to differentiate itself from other grass types. You do have the Seed Bomb, Swords Dance option with your Synthesis, which is a good set. But you're going to end up mainly just being a B in terms of grass types. You could argue that Torterra is an A in the overall Pokemon, but it's a B for now. Next we have Arboliva, and Arboliva is an interesting case because you could argue that you could run either ability. Seed Sower is probably the better one just because Arboliva is the only one that has Seed Sower, and if you're running Arboliva, it's probably for the Seed Sower most of the time. But you can't go wrong with Giga Drain, Strength Sap, one of your screens. You also have Charm, and you have Synthesis to heal yourself if you're not getting enough healing from Giga Drain. As well as you also have the Pollen Puff to help out your allies, so decent overall. The only thing about Arboliva is that sometimes it's a little hard to use offensively, so it's gonna sit at just a B. So the thing about Lurantis is that it's just kind of like a worse Superior in most regards. You do have the superpower, which Superior does not have, and you do have the Leech Life. We're not going to talk about Lurantis again, so I'm just going over all of the moves that it can have. But your Leaf Storm is going to be like, okay, it's still good damage. You're still a Contrary Mon, so you can Stellar Terra Blast, and that's great. But that's, like, most of the time you're just using Superior. Like, I don't know what to say here. Still enough for a B tier, though. Up next we have Zarude. Zarude is very interesting with its moveset because you have Jungle Healing, which is flat out just better Life Dew. And then with Zarude you have pretty good attacking options in Seed Bomb and Sword Stance. And then you have Grassy Terrain, which I wouldn't say you should run on most grass types, however it is useful on Zarude, because your other options are like Snarl and Bulk Up and Drain Punch, which are still good. And again, if this wasn't in the context, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but if this wasn't in the context of grass types overall, I think Zarude would be an A tier. However, it's just going to sit at a B tier. So Iron Leaves is at least worth a mention here because you do have the Leaf Blade Swords Dance, and then with your electric terrains, or say like you're battling a water type and somebody's bringing an electric type that also benefits from electric terrain, then you also benefit as a result. However, with all of the good grass types, it's hard to argue for building an Iron Leaves specifically for doing Tera raids, so we're just going to put Iron Leaves down at a C. Look, Shaman is an interesting one. You would really only ever use the Sky form, you would never use the base form. I don't remember exactly what the base form is called. But before this, I actually didn't know what Shaman's signature move did. And it gives you a 40% chance to lower the target's special defense by 2. However, with Serene Grace, that becomes an 80% chance, which is pretty good as long as you're landing the Seed Flare. So your offensive potential goes absolutely nuts with Seed Flare and Giga Drain in combination with each other. You can also Growth and you can Worry Seed to get rid of an ability which has some pretty niche opportunities. However, you are so much of a glass cannon that I can really only argue using Shaman as like a C grade.
Water types.
Up next to start off the water types, we have Azumarill. Now, Azumarill is probably your premier belly drum user, as you do have the huge power ability, which is flat out busted because it just doubles your damage. But with Liquidation and belly drum and Shell Bell, there's not a lot of Pokemon that are weak to Liquidation that will be able to handle Azumarill. There will be some, but not too many. And you do have stuff like the Chilling Water and your Light Screen and Charm and Mud Slap in order to help work with other members of the team. And if you don't want to go huge power for whatever reason, you do have the Sap Sipper, which can make you immune to grass type moves, which is also very handy if you want to use some kind of weird Sap Sipper, maybe like a Tera, I don't know, like Tera Fire combination or Flying combination for whatever reason. Not sure what typing resistances that would really give you, but you could do it. And initially I wanted to give Azumarill an S just because it is such a strong water type Pokemon.
However, it is going to end up ranking at around a high A grade just because of the stats in the top right corner. But give or take a bar or so, I could definitely see just making Azumarill an S tier. It was very handy during the Charizard raids, whenever we didn't have super solid counters for being Charizard raids at the very start of the game, so Azumarill definitely holds its own place in terms of water types. So the thing with Kyogre here is that Kyogre, on the surface, feels like the strongest water type, probably because you are a legendary Pokemon and you have Drizzle to exert so much immediate water type damage. However, you really don't have too many tools to sustain yourself. You do have the Calm Mind and the Chilling Water for your stat boosting and stat dropping. And Origin Pulse is pretty worth it, I would say, even for the accuracy drops that it has. However, you could just go Shell Bell here if you don't want to be running Rest. There's not really much in Kyogre's moveset in order to support it if you're not using Rest. But you do have the option, if you're trying to fight like a 5-star, maybe like a Fire type, Tera type, you could just click Choice Specs full HP Water Spout into the Fire type, and even if you do like half damage to it, and then maybe like 2 other water spouts, and then it kills you, and then you come back and you're full health, and you can click Terra Water Spout while its Terra Shield is up. That's a decent way to deal with some things that have very low HP bars, and just absolutely just stomp right through the Terra Raid. And so therefore, Kyogre is a pretty strong A grade overall. Maybe not the first thing I would grab, but definitely still good.
As for Walking Wake here, we're pretty similar to Gouging Fire, except in the sense that Sunny Day increases your fire type damage move. With Gouging Fire, Sunny Day increases your Hydro Steam and activates your Photosynthesis, which is pretty good. You've also got a good number of supporting options. We have Snarl on the move pool, but you could be Breaking Swipe or Chilling Water depending on the situation. And you could swap out for Scald if you're working for if you need the burns for whatever reason. Since Walking Wake doesn't have a way to heal itself, it can be a little awkward to use in some scenarios, but it's still like very, very good water type damage. It can be a little awkward to set up sometimes, so therefore it's just gonna be like a low A grade over here on the Walking Wake.
Primarina is pretty high up in water types, I would say, just because its move pool allows it to exert some pretty good damage with Hyper Voice, as well as you have the Life Dew if you're working in a team setting, and then you get your screens. Ignore that big root. But with Primarina, you have a lot of really good special bulk. You wouldn't really bring Primarina in to fight physical attackers, but your special bulk is really good. There's nothing like super special that Primarina does, but it just does like everything that it needs to do just kind of well enough in order to be considered an overall like kind of low A. Now, Tentacle is interesting when you think about water types because you have the Acid Spray and you have ways to decrease both of the defenses in Chilling Water and Skitter Smack. Surf is going to be your main damage here, as it is for most water types that don't have a signature move. But you also have some interesting tech moves in the fact that you can click acupressure into things, which will come up later in a different strategy. But you can also click Acid Armor, and you can click Throat Chop in order to negate sound-based moves. And Clear Body can be handy if something is trying to lower your defensive stats or offensive stats. But with your good amount of special bulk, you can definitely make this Pokemon work in a lot of scenarios. Again, it's hard to make Pokemon with Acid Spray not work in a lot of scenarios. But we're going to go with an overall grade of a pretty good A. So we're going to talk about Politoed and Poliwrath at the same time, because they're both fairly comparable. It's just that Poliwrath has more attack than Politoed does, but Politoed lacks the fighting typing, which is a good and a bad thing. But pretty much what you're going to be doing with both of these for their water type attacking is just have Liquidation, click Belly Drum. It's pretty much just the same idea as we had with the Azumarill, except now we're being a Politoed and a Poliwrath, and we have Water Absorb as our main abilities, which is pretty useful in some scenarios. Again, with Vaporeon, like 1/3 of all 7-star Tera Raid Pokemon, give or take a Pikachu or an Eevee, is a water type. Probably the most notable thing that you can do with a Politoed or a Poliwrath is that you can set their Tera type to be something like Steel and then give them Tera Blast, and now you have a Belly Drum Steel type that is immune to water type moves. And this strategy can be applicable to a lot of places, so it does pop up every once in a while and can be pretty handy. So both Polytone and Poliwrath are going to be coming in at A tiers. They're pretty good. I would definitely consider building one if you're looking for water type damage. Slowking and Slowbro is another pair that we're going to put together here, mostly because they just work in the exact same way. And the fact that you're going to be using Scald, Calm Mind, Slack Off, and Reflect, and on Slowbro you're going to be using Light Screen. And you can have Nasty Plot instead of Calm Mind if you want to go that route. You can also do like Iron Defense and Slowbro. Your ability doesn't really come into play with Slowbro, and being a water psychic type isn't super valuable when trying to do water type damage, but it can be helpful. But there are better special attacking water attackers, so we're just gonna give Slowbro and Slowking the rank of B, which feels about right for them. A really interesting one in terms of raw damage is just like Hisuian Samurott, because you're just going to be using your Sharpness ability, which is a flat-out busted ability that multiplies all your Sharpness moves by 1.5, and Razor Shell is a Sharpness move and has a 50% chance to lower defense by 1, and if you're using like 6 or 7 Razor Shells over the course of an entire Tera raid, you can see how the damage will begin to stack up pretty quickly with Hisuian Samurott here, and most of your other things are going into your offense, but you do have Snarl and probably also Chilling Water. But you probably don't want to be using Snarl or Chilling Water too often, as the main reason you're using Hisuian Samurott is to whip out as much damage as fast as possible and consistently. Usually a Pokemon like this would kind of be around the C, however, just because Sharpness is so nutty in terms of offense, it's going to move Hisuian Samurott up to being about a B. Oh, what do I want to say about Dondozo? Dondozo has Unaware. That is the main reason that you would use Dondozo. I mean, Liquidation, Curse, Sleep, Talk, Rest isn't like a bad set, it's just pretty much like your only set, because even if you're using a stat-dropping move like Chilling Water, Unaware is going to ignore that, so it kind of makes Dondozo hard to use, but its X Factor is high enough that we can just about rank Dondozo to be an overall B. As much as I hate talking about legendaries, because the term legendary often causes people to just turn their brains off, Palkia is a pretty notable water-type legendary, with your Surf, your Chilling Water, your Rain Dance, your Rest. You've got at least like a pretty good set here, and if something has Dragon Shear, then you're gonna be dealing out some pretty good water-type damage. Not the best in the world, but still, like, decently good in order to be, like, just barely qualifying as, like, a B tier. Araquanid is a really hard one for me to pin down bars on, because, like, Araquanid doesn't have too much offense, but then you look at Water Bubble, which is pretty much just huge power for water type moves, and like that's pretty good. And your defenses is like really good in special defense, and you have like Lunge and Skitter Smack to decrease those respective attacks, which is pretty good. And you can even do some interesting tech stuff with entrainment and putting Water Bubble or Water Absorb onto other Pokemon to increase their water type damage, which is pretty good. We also got like Stockpile and Wide Guard, which, I mean, they're alright. But like, based on the bars and their current placements, we've currently got Araquanid stocked out to be a B. But I think this is one of those ones where if you put it in the right position, it could be like an S or maybe a really high A tier, depending on how you position the Araquanid. Now, I know I'm going to catch some people off with talking about Urshifu here, but you gotta hear me out here for a sec. Urshifu is, like, just kind of okay. Like, you have a Surging Strikes, which always guarantees the critical hit. However, since this move has to hit 3 times every time, it means that you are taking way more time to deal damage, which means you're probably getting in about 3 like, uses of the move Surging Strikes, where you could get off, like, 4 or 5 uses of the move Liquidation, for example. And since every single one of the Surging Strikes crits, that's another amount of time added on. And if you're using a Shell Bell on Urshifu in order to, you know, get actual healing back from your Surging Strikes, you're gonna heal up in between every single one of those Surging Strikes, which means it's gonna take even more time. So while, yeah, Surging Strikes is kind of cool, and you can click Sword Stance, and you can click Coaching. We love Coaching, by the way. Coaching is great. You can click Focus Energy, which... Actually, you would never click Focus Energy here because Surging Strikes, but you could. But because of all these things, Urshifu is just like a C. Like, it's not something that I would necessarily grab for, but it definitely has its niche scenarios. So the main reason that you would run Milotic is because of its competitive ability. If you can get that to proc, you'll be in a really good spot most of the time. You also have some pretty good support moves in Life to Recover and Chilling Water, and I mean, that's about it for Milotic here. Milotic is definitely a bit more of a support-orientated Pokemon, but it can still do pretty good Water-type damage, so we're going to give it an old C here in the attackers. And then pairing up pretty similarly here, you might be able to wiggle the bars a little bit in either direction for Empoleon to make Empoleon slightly better than Milotic, but they both do pretty much the same thing, as you want them to get their competitive proc in order to deal out massive Water-type damage. And Empoleon has a bit more tools than Milotic in Metal Sound and Mud Slap and Throat Chop and stuff. But you are a Steel type, so if you're going to try and deal water damage into Fire types, it is noted that you're going to take neutral damage there for a bit. Also, you're weak to Ground types. Yeah, it's just, you know, there's only so much you can do. It's still a C. And then as for Lumineon, I mean, if I'm being honest, the only reason that Lumineon is here is because it has both Volt Absorb and Water Absorb, which means that it's probably good in some scenario, like somewhere, and if I don't put it here in like a year or so, somebody's gonna comment, why did you include Lantern in the water types? Don't you know it was super good in beating that one? Okay, yeah, that's great. It's just a Lantern. Get over it. Sorry, I kind of overstepped my bounds there. C tier.
Normal types.
Okay, so now we're moving on to normal types, and the thing about normal types is that you would never really use normal type moves to attack into Tera raids because they can't ever be super effective against anything. However, there are some scenarios where you can warrant using normal type moves just because of their utility. And of course, there are coverage moves that you can put on Pokemon. Like, for example, if you wanted Dazzling Gleam on Terapagos, you could do that to beat dragons. So it's still good to discuss these Pokemon. But starting off with Terapagos, I mean, click one of your other moves 3 times, and then you Terastallize, and then you click Tera Starstorm for the rest of the game, and theoretically, like, you're always good. Because once you get into that Stellar Tera and you're always hitting your super effective move against the opponent, there's just not much else that can really replace that feeling other than, like, Contrary, as we've previously discussed. But this is going to be one of those times where I go against the bars a little bit here, and we're going to put Terapagos as an S, just because it is such an easy-to-use Pokemon and had, like, very little downsides, realistically. Ursaluna normal form is worth a shout out just because it's a Belly Drum Mon that has Drain Punch for healing itself, but you can also go with the Facade option if you want to give yourself a Flame Orb and then have Guts. You can deal a lot of really ridiculous normal type damage very quickly. So it's a very good general option, but if you don't want to commit to the Belly Drum because you're not getting enough health back, you can just go with the Sword Stance option. And the option of Drain Punch bumps Ursaluna up to being just about an A tier. However, without it, it would be around a B and can be a little hard to use sometimes. Snorlax is in kind of a similar spot to Ursaluna, even though we don't have the Guts Facade like Ursaluna does. Body Slam is still pretty decent and gives you a chance to para. We have much better defensive options in the Chilling Water, and it's easier to get off Rest because instead of Thick Fat as our resistance, we can also be Gluttony, which means that we'll eat our berry faster, so we can use one of the Confusion Berries, like Aguav, for example, if we're Gluttony. But we don't have as much of the same raw power as Ursaluna does, which is going to knock Snorlax down to being just like a B tier. Greedent is a bit of a hard one to pin down. I didn't initially have Greedent in normal types whenever I was making the normal type list. It was just going to be Terapagos, Ursaluna, and Snorlax. However, Greedent actually has like a lot of really tricky things that it does. Like, just gives it so much X factor, but like is extremely hard to pin down why I think it. Let's just go over it and you'll maybe understand a little bit better. So like you can Belly Drum and Stockpile, which gives you like pretty good Body Slam where you could run a coverage move. You also have Mud Slap, which is very good. And you have some pretty interesting tech moves in Stuffed Cheeks, which makes you eat your berry, so more often than not you'll use it to heal yourself, and then you'll get a quick +3 off. However, you can also use it in combination with your ability, which restores 1/3 of your health after eating your berry, which means you don't have to necessarily be a healing berry, and you can actually run something that gives you a defense boost or a special defense boost, for example, and then heal off of that, and then you can put Greed into a bit of an easier spot. And you can maybe even run Thief if you want to, like, make a Greedent group of Pokemon that just all bring berries. I'm not exactly sure if you can actually thief items off of other Pokemon in Tera Raid, so take this with a bit of a grain of salt. But you could thief the berries off of your friends, and then, Greedent eats them and then gets a bunch of health back, and he's just a crazy little guy. There's also Body Press, which we'll talk about a bit more later on about Body Press endgames. But if you're stuffing cheeks to get +2 and then clicking Body Press into things, that's also a pretty good strategy. But yeah, I mean, like, you can belly drum and then you can eat your citrus berry, and then your cheek pouch makes it so that you're back up to full health. And there's just so many things about Greedent that makes it really interesting, that makes it really hard for me to discount. And according to the bars in the top right corner, it sits as a B tier. However, this might be the Pokemon that I know the least about what to actually grade when it comes to grading, because it's just all over the place. I don't know what to do.
Bug types.
Starting off bug types, we have probably what is, in my opinion, the strongest bug type for Tera raids, other than like Tera Bug Mew. But with Slitherwing here, you get Leech Life, and Leech Life is great. It heals you for 50% of the damage that you just dealt. You also have Bulk Up, and you have Morning Sun in order to heal yourself if Leech Life isn't doing enough. And you can work with Sun teams. For example, if you're fighting a Grass type and there's already a Pokemon in the field that's setting Sun, like Gouging Fire, you can also benefit from it with your Photosynthesis. And then you have the two Bug-type tech moves for Lunge and Skitter Smack to lower each of the attack stats. And you also have Will-O-Wisp as a bit of an interesting tech move here. But unfortunately, bugs kind of get outpaced when compared to other Pokemon that deal super effective damage into other things such as bugs. And if you're using Slitherwing to fight a Psychic type, for example, you're going to take super effective damage from the Psychic type. So that's not great. But still, yeah, Slitherwing's an A tier. A grade. Volcarona here is going to be our first Pokemon making a reappearance. I'm sure I said this towards the start of the video, but depending on what Pokemon is being used for what purpose, the bars in the top right might not match. Either because, like, your defenses change based on what type you want to play into, or I just forgot. But regardless, Volcarona still has a lot of its same great tools, except this time, instead of Fiery Dance, you're going with Bug Buzz. So we're going to put Volcarona at an A, at least Bug Volcarona. Frostmoth sits in a similar spot to Volcarona, just kind of worse. Your abilities are a tad bit more useful, I would say, especially Ice Scales. But you don't have a healing move in Morning Sun like Volcarona has, so your defensive options are not as great. And Aurora Veil I did put down here, but however, with Aurora Veil, it means that you either need to bring a Pokemon that sets up snow or a Pokemon that manually has Snowscape in its moveset. So if you're using two move slots for both Aurora Veil and Snowscape, there tends to be better options than doing that. You really don't see this combination very often. And with a worse defensive type than Volcarona, this is gonna sit at a B tier, but like this is the B tier for bug types, and a B tier for bug types is like a C tier for everything else. Okay, so the thing about Scizor is that it's a bug type. Isn't that cool? But you also have Lunge and Skitter Smack. No Leech Life on Scizor, which is the main thing that you would want, but it doesn't have it. And then you have Sword Stance and you have Focus Energy for breaking through with pretty good immense physical bug damage, but again, that is bug damage, so eh. Then you have Swarm for when you're at a third less of your HP, you get a Choice Band. There's really not much that I can say here, so we're gonna have to give Scizor a C and move on. So Araquanid is making a return appearance, and I mean, it's just worse when you're not using water type moves because you're not getting the benefit of its water bubble ability. But like, at least you restore health whenever you click Leech Life. It's just you don't really have a way to damage boost yourself with the Leech Lives. But you're still coming in enough to get a C. So good job, Araquanid.
Electric types.
Moving on to Miraidon, there is a lot to talk about Miraidon. I mean, we have a contender for probably one of the best Tera Raid Pokemon here. Because you can't go wrong with Parabolic Charge because it heals you for 50% of the damage that you deal. And you're an electric type with Hadron Engine, which means that you set up your own electric terrain as well as getting a boost while that terrain is up. And while it can be kind of difficult to reset it, You can't just have manual electric terrain. Is somewhere around here, or maybe not. I guess manual electric terrain is another option that we can add here. But just in case your electric type damage wasn't enough, you can opt to go for charge, which will double the power of your next electric type move and give you a special defense buff. Or you could swap in Calm Mind for it. It's the same, except Calm Mind's just kind of permanent, but it's not a double charge like charge is. If you want to go for raw electric type super effective damage, you have your signature move, which is Electro Drift, which is so much damage. There's so many multipliers going on here that it is crazy. You do have your dual screens for your team synergy, as well as the dragon cheer. Since you are a dragon type, you can also benefit from other dragon cheers. You also have the metal sound to decrease your target's special defense. Charge beam is another option that you can use in case you want to maybe click charge beam 3 times. You have a 70% chance of getting a special attack drop while you're dealing the damage to get up to your electric Tera. You also have snarl to use defensively to lower the opponent's special attack, but it's really not that necessary. But I mean, overall, Miraidon is just such a crazy good Pokemon that if I had an S plus tier, I would give it an S plus tier, but we're just gonna give it an S for now. But definitely do not count out Bellibolt. I know it's hard to follow up Miraidon, but Bellibolt does a pretty good job kind of covering things that Miraidon doesn't. You do have the Acid Spray, which Miraidon does not have. Miraidon only has Metal Sound. You have a bit more defensive options like your Chilling Water and your Mud Slaps to decrease accuracy, as well as you have somewhere around here. I guess I did not put it on. I guess I might need to work a little bit more on my electric sets. But you do have the Slack Off, just in case you're not healing enough with your Parabolic Charge, as well as having your dual screens on Bellibolt. Again, you have the... I put screens on twice. What am I doing with my life? But you do have the charge and electric terrain, as most electric types do, and your ability Electromorphosis makes it so that the power of your next electric type attack is doubled whenever you get hit. And since you're pretty much getting hit every turn of a Tera Raid battle, it means that you're always having your electric type damage doubled by your ability. So, Bellibolt's another easy S tier Pokemon. It's hard to tell who's better, Miraidon or Bellibolt, but I would say just make both. They're so good. Next up, we got Iron Hands. Iron Hands is going to probably be your premier physical attacking electric type, as you do have the belly drum option, but you also have the electric terrain to not only activate your Quark Drive, but also to boost the power of your electric type moves, and you have Focus Energy, just in case you want to go for the critical hits that won't ever get removed during a Tera Raid. And instead of slotting in Thunder Punch, you can slot in Supercell Slam. It's just that 1/20th of the time you're going to deal half your health, and whenever that happens, you are going to really regret running Supercell Slam. But you also have some pretty good options in the charge, and you have Sword Stance, and again, you can run Drain Punch just in case the healing that you're getting from your Shovel is just not enough. Iron Hands is definitely more useful for its Drain Punch and fighting type damage, but in terms of electric type damage, we're looking at an A grade. Toxtricities are interesting just because you can exert so much offensive pressure with your Acid Spray and your Thunderbolt. Getting stab on both is very good, as well as you have very good supporting tools with like Nuzzle and Taunt, and if we go over to the low-key form, you have moves like Charge, Electric Terrain, and a Magnetic Flux, which can be a little gimmicky, but when the gimmick works, it's pretty good. And then you also have Snarl for support, and then if you can work with other plus or minus Pokemon in the raid, you get a free Choice Specs boost, which is phenomenal. So yeah, just an all-around good A-tier Pokemon. I'd definitely make one of these. Sandy Shocks is another interesting one because the ground typing doesn't really do much for you, but it can have its niche scenarios. Your moveset isn't too bad. You've got Thunderbolt, you've got Metal Sound, you've got Charge Beam, you can proc your own photosynthesis with Sunny Day, but that's not necessarily recommended. As well as you can set up electric terrain for yourself and other things to deal more electric type damage, and you have your dual screens, and you have your charge. So, but I can definitely see some scenarios where specifically Sandy Shocks excels, so we're just gonna give Sandy Shocks, it's like a high B, good B. Kind of paralleling Sandy Shocks, we have Iron Thorns, which does extremely similar things. The main shakeups here with Iron Thorns is that you are a physical attacker, which means that you play a little bit better into support with teams. As you have a very strong physical dropping move, and you have a very strong physical damage increasing move. And you also have your electric terrain to activate your Quark drive. I think you've probably heard that enough now. You get the idea of why you would run electric terrain. But you also have the Snarl and the Breaking Swipe, which can be add-ons depending on what you're fighting. Something's dealing too much damage to you, you can slot one of those on for instead of either like the Screech or the Sword Stance. But just like Shocks, this is another solid B tier. When it comes to Raging Bolt, I mean, it's just a worse Miraidon, kinda. Like, your ability isn't always active, it doesn't set up a terrain for you. You have Thunderbolt instead of Parabolic Charge. Like, there's some niche cases for Raging Bolt, based on the moveset that we've got here, but like, just use Miraidon. This is only really like a C grade. Raging Bolt doesn't have much to stand out. And then Zekrom is in a very similar situation. Like, you do have two pretty unique moves in Fusion Bolt and Bolt Strike that can deal a lot of damage, but other than that, you're kind of plumb out of luck when it comes to being compared to Miraidon. Terravolt is fun, though. Unfortunately, as much as I love Gen 5 and Zekrom was my first legendary, Zekrom, I'm gonna have to put you at a C, bud.
Rock types!
Okay, moving on to rocks. We really don't have much to say about rocks. In fact, I could have probably included them all in one team builder, just like I did for normal types. But we've got Iron Boulder here, and Iron Boulder is similar to Iron Leaves in the fact that all it really does is use a damaging move, and click Sword Stance, and click Electric Terrain. But this time we have Taunt. So, like, in terms of overall attackers, this Pokemon would probably just be a B. However, since we're kind of sparse on rock-type attackers that I like for Tera raids, we're going to give this Mads an A. So, good job, Iron Boulder. Iron Thorns is going to make a pretty quick reappearance here since Electric and Rock are back-to-back, but, I mean, the only difference is that you're trading out Supercell Slam for Rock Slide, so it's pretty much the same as before, and I think is still a B. And then Garganacl is going to be our last one that I want to discuss, not because of Soul Cure, but Purifying Salt is a pretty useful ability. It means that you can't be status, so you can't be slapped by stuff by Spore, and you can't be Will-O-Wisp, which has pretty niche uses. You can also go for the Rock Slide Curse set, which makes you pretty physically bulky. Like, you really wouldn't bring Garganacl to fight a special attacker, you'd probably bring it to fight a physical attacker, and at least you have the recovery to heal yourself up, and also the leftovers is not so bad, but you could also run like a berry instead. Then you have the Wide Guard, just in case you want to try and block some spread damage for whatever reason. All of this is like just enough to make Garganacl like about a low B, but in terms of rock types...
Ground types!
So starting off ground types, we have Clodsire here. And Clodsire has a good bit of stuff going for it, but you do have great options for defense and offense in Earthquake, Cursed, Rest, and Amnesia. This is probably going to be your main set most of the time. Then you can use a Chesto Berry to wake yourself up one time, but you can also Heal Cheer to wake yourself up from the rest. You have a lot of good options for swapping out other moves, such as Stockpile to increase either your defenses, and you also have the Recover if you don't want to be running Rest. And you have the Mud Slap for lowering accuracy, and you have Acid Spray. I wouldn't recommend using your Clodsire as a special attacker, however, it can be a nice move to have if you want to support other special attackers with the Acid Spray. And then you do have two really good abilities in the fact that you have Unaware, but you also have Water Absorb to make yourself immune to water-type moves, which can be really handy considering the fact that you are weak to water-type moves, and having a ground type that is immune to water-type moves in Tera raids is very valuable. So we're going to go ahead and give Clodsire an A grade. Definitely deserves it. Up next we have Clodsire's brother from another mother, Quagsire here, who does a lot of the same things as Clodsire. You have a lot of the same tools that Clodsire had in Earthquake, Curse, Chilling Water, Recover, Rest, Acid Spray, Amnesia, Mud Slap, and Stockpile, but Quagsire has Eerie Impulse for some reason. Quagsire, why do you have this? And again, you do have both the Water Absorb and the Unaware, but, you know, the main difference between using Quagsire and Clodsire is that one of them is a Water type and one of them is a Poison type. But they both get the same grade at an A grade. Sandy Shocks is much better as a ground type than it was as an electric type, at least in my opinion, because you get a stronger move in the form of Earth Power. And then some of your tech moves do change out. It's easier to run Iron Defense whenever your secondary type isn't making you weak to all the things that you want to be super effective into. And you also have Scorching Sands as a tech move that is lower in base power than Earth Power, but the 30% chance to burn can be really handy, because you can burn through Tera Shield. And these changes are enough to bump Sandy Shocks up to being an A tier, so good for Sandy Shocks. We got Ursaluna making a return. Instead of clicking Facade, you're going to be clicking Earthquake, which is still good. And this time your attacking move can be super effective against things. But this is relative to other ground type attacking options, so even though Ursaluna is better as a ground type, it's a B in terms of ground types as a grade. Great Tusk fulfills a pretty similar role to Ursaluna, mainly just having crazy offensive damage with Earthquake, Bulk Up. You do have Mud Slap to swap out as a tech move, and then you can activate your Photosynthesis with Sunny Day, which can be helpful if you're trying to fight something that has a water type move in its moveset, and you get to activate your ability. So Great Tusk is pretty decent, and pretty decent gets a B grade. And then Groudon has some pretty neat stuff that it can do. Your signature move, Precipice Blades, is going to be your main damage option just because it's such a strong move. You have the Sword Stance for setting up, and you have the Mud Slap for decreasing accuracy, as well as you can get off a rest if your Shell Bell isn't healing yourself enough from the Precipice Blades, or maybe you miss Precipice Blades a little bit unluckily and you can't get your healing from your Shell Bell. And you also have some pretty good swap-in options in Bulk Up and Will-O-Wisp for dealing with physical attackers and increasing your own physical attack. But you have to be careful when using Groudon, because Ground type is super effective against Fire, Rock, and Steel, and if you're using Groudon to fight Fire types, your Drought ability is going to cause you to take more damage from Fire type moves, so you really only want to use Groudon for fighting the Rock and Steel types. But the Drought ability can be helpful if you're teaming up with things like Great Tusk or Sandy Shocks that get their ability activated by it. And because of this, we can pretty safely fit Groudon at a nice B. So Tera is the same as when we talked about in grass types, except now instead of Seed Bomb you have Earthquake, so it's still going to be sitting at a B grade. Garchomp is a okay ground type. You have the Earthquake and Sword Stance to do a lot of ground type damage, and you also have the Breaking Swipe to save yourself a little bit against physical attackers, and you are a Dragon type, so you can work in tandem with other Dragon types by using Dragon Cheer. But other than that, Garchomp doesn't have much to really support itself with, so we're just going to put Garchomp at like a C. It's very similar to Garchomp in the fact that it just does the same thing as Garchomp with Earthquake and Sword Stance, but you do have Iron Defense and Breaking Swipe because you really only be bringing Rhyperior in to fight physical attackers, but it can do that pretty well. And with your Solid Rock ability, if something has like one move that can super effectively hit rock or ground, like a fighting type move for example, you can take the damage pretty well, and your Shell Bell will heal you up as long as you're getting your Sword Stances off. You also have Lightning Rod to make yourself immune to electric type moves, which, I mean, you already are, but you could be Tera Water for some reason and be immune to electric type moves. But all this can be kinda hard to use, and it doesn't have much, so we're just gonna put Rhyperior in a C. Excadrill is, again, very similar in the fact that it has Earthquake and Sword Stance, but now we have Mud Slap and Rest. We also have Mold Breaker, just in case you want to hit something that has Levitate, for example, with an Earthquake, you can do that with Excadrill. Your Steel typing can also be useful in some defensive scenarios. So we're just gonna put Excadrill at another C tier, and we're gonna move on.
And then we have Anger Point Camerupt coming back for ground types. And I wanted to give Camerupt a little bit more X Factor because ground type Anger Point is a little bit more interesting. And then I remembered Crocodile exists to do exactly that. So it's all the same as when we were using Camerupt's Anger Point for fire type damage, except now we have Earthquake. And you've seen all these moves before, you know why Crocodile has them. And it's a lot harder to justify using ground types with Anger Points compared to the other ground types. I don't know why, it just kind of feels that way. But either way, C grades for both of these guys, just to flush them out.
And Gastrodon's been waiting patiently here to be talked about. I didn't talk about Gastrodon during water types, just because Gastrodon doesn't really do that great of damage. We do have the Earth Power, but across all of our different moves that we have, we don't really have anything to boost the damage of our Earth Power, so you're going to have to be relying on outside supports in order to lower the special defense for you so you can start dealing damage. But all the other moves that you have are some great tech moves, really. I can't complain about Recover, Clear Smog, Chilling Water. You can boost either your defenses with Amnesia and Acid Armor, but you also have the Stockpile. You can also go for Rest, which definitely was not previously Recover. And then you have your Mud Slap and your Skitter Smack. So you have a lot of defensive tools. It's just that you pretty much only have defensive tools. So we're going to be sticking Gastrodon in a C.
Steel types.
To start off Steel types, we have another contender for what is possibly one of the best Tera raid Pokemon, especially if you're playing by yourself. So the thing that Magearna does is, I have it nicknamed the Lord of Death here. And that is because whenever your Soul Heart ability activates by something on the field fainting, you get a special attack boost. And say you're going up against a 7-star Tera raid where you have 3 allies, and all 3 of your allies get knocked out by the 7-star Tera raid, that means that you get a free +3 boost just because you have Soul Heart as your ability. And like, even if those boosts are wiped away kind of quickly, your allies will come back after the 5 seconds, and then the 10, and then the 15 seconds. And then once they get knocked out again, you'll get the Soul Heart boost again, so it's super easy to go to +6 with this Pokemon and just whip out massive amounts of damage very quickly. And it is a little bit more difficult to use this idea with other players, since when other players get knocked out, it takes time off the timer, and that's never good. But you could have a second person be solely dedicated to just supporting Magearna and knocking out some of the allies instead of actually attacking the Tera raid boss. And even with Magearna itself, because of your Shell Bell, you get an 8th health back of whatever damage you deal. So if you need just a little bit of damage healed and you need to get a special attack boost by knocking something out, you can just knock out your allies and get free special attack boost. Your moveset is honestly nothing special whenever you're looking to deal steel damage. You got Flash Cannon, Calm Mind, and Iron Defense for your defensive options, but also to support your special attack just in case your Soul Heart isn't getting activated fast enough. And you do have the Metal Sound for decreasing special defense, which is pretty good. As well as you also have some defensive options in Light Screen and Reflect, and you do have the Zap Cannon in case you want to take 2 or 3 turns to try and land a paralysis. But just the simplicity of Magearna's ability and how busted it is in Tera raids, this makes Magearna really, really strong and like a really easy S tier. Next up we got Berserker. Berserker is really interesting, mostly because of its Steely Spirit ability. There's not any other ability that really works like this in the game other than like Battery and Power Spot. But Steely Spirit specifically not only increases the power of your own Steel-type moves, but also increases the power of all your allies' Steel-type moves. By a pretty notable margin too, with the 1.5 times boost. So this means that you pretty much have a choice band for free as long as you're using Steel-type moves, and that's your only stab, so that's the only thing you're using anyways. But looking into the actual moves, most of the time you're just going to be using Iron Head, Sword Stance, you have Screech. You do have the Taunt to negate some status moves whenever Terra Shield isn't up, and then you do have some supplementary boosting and dropping moves like Charm, Amnesia, Iron Defense, and Curse. But you also have tech moves like Throat Chop, and you have Chilling Water is another dropping move. And then we also have Endure. And this is probably the only Pokemon I would say that you can run Endure on to some justification in Tera raids. But if it's towards the end of a Tera raid, and your health is kind of low for whatever reason, and you feel like you're going to get knocked out in the next turn, you can warrant using Endure to help you survive for longer. Because instead of using like 3 attacking turns where you're going to be knocked out, you can just wait until the game like is about to force you to move, and then you can click Endure, which won't kill you. And then you can wait for another bit of while, so instead of getting knocked out, your Steely Spirit will still remain active for everybody else in the Tera raid, which will help them to guarantee to beat it. And you can also just swap Endure out for Protect. So if you use Protect, you can't be healed by like Pollen Puff, for example. So Endure does have its kind of niche scenarios. And then we also have the Gyro Ball. If you want to swap out your Iron Head and your minimum speed nature, you'd have to go into your IVs and you'd have to be a minimum speed nature. and you can calc how much damage the Gyro Ball will do, based on your speed differentials for most of the 7-star Tera raids. But yeah, Berserker has a lot of really neat things that it can do, despite being kind of squishy, so we're gonna give Berserker an S. Goldango is usually a pretty reliable steel type, just because your offense covers for your kind of squishy defenses. With your flash cannon and your nasty plot and your metal sound, you can deal out a lot of steel type damage, and you also have the recover to recover half your health whenever you get a little bit down. You can also run your screens, and then you also have Charge Beam for raising your special attack. And then your ability Good as Gold can help negate a lot of variance with things that want to throw like Thunder Waves, or Eerie Impulses that want to lower your special attack. It's just very handy to have Good as Gold sometimes. And for all that, I'd be willing to give Goldango a pretty solid A.
Now here we've got Hisuian Gudra, and Hisuian Gudra is an Acid Spray user, which is going to be your main tool, as with most of the Acid Spray users, but you also have Chilling Water, and you have Life Dew for healing yourself and your teammates. You also have another dropping move in Skitter Smack, but you also have the Dragon Tears, all Dragon types do, and you have the Shelter, which is pretty much just Iron Defense for increasing your own defense. I could say this is another Pokemon that Rest is pretty notable on, just to get a lot of health back fast. But Gudra is also pretty helped out by its abilities with Shell Armor, where you can't be crit, so you're pretty safe in using your defensive boosting options. But you also have the Sap Sipper, which can be used to negate a type, and made Gudra completely immune to Venusaur raids, which was very funny. But this is another solid Acid Spray Pokemon, so we're gonna give Gudra an A.
And here we have Tinkaton, who everybody knows because of the big hammer. It's hard to talk about steel types and not talk about Gigaton Hammer as probably the best steel type move for Tera raids. But you can only use it every other turn, but that's not so much of a downside when you do have great supporting moves, like your Sword Stance to increase your attack, or your Rock Smash to defense drop through Tera Shield. As well as you have like the Skitter Smack to decrease stat drop, as well as you can put up your screens. And you can also skill swap on Tinkaton, which is a nice tech move in case something is really dependent on its ability. And then you also have Metal Claw if you're looking to deal specifically steel type damage, which does have a 10% chance to raise your attack. But this Pokemon is definitely a force to be reckoned with in terms of steel type damage, which makes it a pretty high A. Kingambit can be a very helpful pick whenever something is trying to lower physical attack and you want to use a physical steel type for whatever reason. You have your Defiant ability for whenever it drops your attack, it'll boost your attack back up 2 stages. And then you just have some pretty basic moves in Ironhead, Sword Stance, Snarl, and Rest, and this is just gonna make Kingambit like an okay B. A Corviknight is nice to have for a multitude of reasons. Your Steel Flying type is a very good type because you're only weak to fire and electric typing. And you would never really bring Corviknight to fight either of those. But you've got like an okay move pool, with your main Steel type damaging move being Ironhead, and then you have Bulk Up to support yourself, and then you have Roost to heal yourself, which can be handy. And then you also have things like the Taunt and your dual screens, and then you can have Screech for defense dropping, and Rock Smash for defense dropping through Tera Shield, though not as efficiently as just using Screech. And then your Mirror Armor ability will send back any drops that are sent your way. Like if a Pokemon is trying to accuracy drop you with Muddy Water, it will reflect the accuracy drop back onto the Tera Raid Pokemon, which is very handy. And I can even see bumping one of the bars on Corviknight on the top right there a little bit, but even if you did bump one of the bars and technically push it into an A, I still think it's a very solid high B, maybe the highest of all the Bs that we have ranked in this entire video, but not quite an A.
So, Solgaleo gives me a feeling like there's a saying like Jack of all trades, master of none. And I think that really applies to Solgaleo here, as you have like a great Steel-type damaging moves that slightly beats Ironhead, and you also have good self-supporting moves in Morning Sun and Cosmic Power. And then you have things like Snarl and your dual screens and your Wide Guard. And then your ability is pretty much just Clear Body, where it negates any stat drops happening towards you. So Solgaleo feels like a really strong Steel-type on paper. However, it's just like not excelling at anything specifically great. I mean, heck, the third set that we have for Solgaleo here is if you want to ditch using your physical attack and go with special attack instead, you've Metal Sound there. But because of the bars in the top right corner, it's hard for me to argue to give Solgaleo anything more than just a B.
Jirachi is an interesting one, just because Steel Psychic is an okay typing. It's not super unique and it doesn't have super great benefits, but it is handy sometimes. You don't really have well, you do have a special Steel type attacking move, it's just that it takes way too long to use. So we're going to be using Flash Cannon, and we have boosting and dropping moves like Calm Mind, Fake Tears, Cosmic Power, and Charm. And we have Mud Slap and Charge Beam for increasing our special attack. And then we also have Life Dew, which boosts your team synergy up by a bit. And then your Serene Grace ability is really only handy for giving yourself a 20% chance to drop your opponent's special defense by one stage. And that can rack up over the course of the Tera raid battle, but can be pretty hit or miss. So while the bars on the top right corner are in place to say that Jirachi should be an A, I actually feel like Jirachi deserves to be put at like a mid-B. I'm just not sure how I would change the bars in order to reflect that, so they're going to stay where they are for now. Actually, just speaking of Steel Psychic types, here we got Iron Crown, who has a bit of a better move than Jirachi. You're going to be dealing more damage than your Flash Cannon option, and also you never miss, which can be handy sometimes. But you've got the Calm Mind, then you have the Electric Terrain to activate your ability, and you have Metal Sound for special defense dropping. But other than that, you really don't have that great of options with Iron Crown, so there's not very many scenarios where I could see really using Iron Crown over the other Steel type options. So in terms of Steel types, Iron Crown is going to be sitting at a C.
Dialga's only really here because it has its raw legendary stats holding it up, but in any scenario that you would be using Dialga, you really should just be using Hisui and Gudra. So we're just gonna put Dialga at a C and move on.
Not much changes about Empoleon since we talked about it in water types. It just now is Flash Cannon. So Empoleon is going to sit where it did in water types at a C grade.
Flying types.
Alright, so moving into flying types, we have a Pokemon that actually surprised me a good bit whenever I was looking at all the different flying types, and that's Toucannon, mostly because I kind of forgot how good Beak Blast is, and since we haven't had Toucannon until the second DLC, I just haven't really been thinking about it that much. But Toucannon is really good for flying type damage in Tera raids, as you can burn pretty much anything at any time as long as it has a physical contact move. And Beak Blast is your main damage move, which you get off 100 base power every turn. It's already a really strong start, but you also have great supporting moves for yourself, such as Roost and Sword Stance, and then you can also Feather Dance the opponent if its physical attack is too high whenever you're trying to send off the Beak Blast. You also have Rock Smash and Screech for lowering physical defense. So yeah, I was a little bit surprised at the time when I started making this flying type list, but I think Toucannon is the best flying type and a very, very solid A grade at that. Next up we have Articuno Galarian form. The main reason that you would run this is because of its competitive ability. If you can get that procced a few times a battle, then you're pretty set on your offenses. He has some pretty good offensive options, and you can either run Air Slash or you can also have Hurricane. And then your defensive options and Calm Mind, Recover, your dual screens are pretty good. And then you also have the tech move Psychic Noise, which might come up sometimes because, for example, like in Mewtwo 7-star, they gave Mewtwo Rest at 50%, so if you click Psychic Noise, it means that it can't do that anymore. Not that you would bring Articuno to fight Mewtwo, but same idea. Then you also have the ability to skill swap, because you don't normally want to be skill swapping away competitive, but you could skill swap competitive onto one of your allies, for example, and that would be okay. But as for the grade, I'm a little hesitant to give Articuno an A, but that might just because I haven't done the rest of the flying types yet, so we're going to give Articuno a low A, and we're going to see what comes up next. Corviknight hasn't really changed much since we talked about it during Steel types, but it does about the same. But it does about the same job, so it's gonna be a B again. Galarian Moltres has Berserk. That is the main reason that you would use it. And if you can get your Berserk to activate a lot of times during the Tera raid battle, which really shouldn't be too difficult, your offenses are going to go through the roof, and you probably don't even need an Nasty Plot. However, you don't have much of a great move pool outside of that, and also you don't have much defensive play. So you tend to be a glass cannon with this thing most of the time. But don't get me wrong, you're still like a very good glass cannon, and just that you gotta be careful. So we're gonna put Galarian Moltres in terms of flying type as a B. That's a pretty good spot for it. Now, Lugia's signature move, Aeroblast, is a very powerful flying type move, and it's the main reason that you would run Lugia over any other flying type, as well as you have some pretty good supporting moves in your Calm Mind and your Chilling Water, and you do have some health recovery and recover. Then you got your dual screens, and Skill Swap is going to be on every psychic type, as soon you'll see, and you probably don't want to use it on every Pokemon that I have it on, but it's just kind of there just cuz. And then if you're running out of PP on your Aeroblast too fast, you can swap in Air Slash to mitigate that a little bit. And then your multi-scale ability is very valuable because it reduces half of the damage you take from the first attack of the Tera raid. All of this is enough to place Lugia at a pretty solid B.
Now, Iron Jugulus is a bit of a strange one, just because, like, immediately there's nothing that really sets it apart from other flying types with Air Slash. However, you do have some pretty nifty tools in Snarl for lowering special attack, and you also have Focus Energy to increase your crit rate, as well as you have the Electric Terrain to activate your Quark Drive. However, if you're flying type, you can't make use of Electric Terrain's other benefit, which is that it can't put you to sleep, so it's kind of obligatory in most cases. But you do have some good extra moves, and Charge Beam for increasing your special attack. You also have Dragon Shear, which is a little strange. You're one of the non-dragons that learns Dragon Shear, which can be helpful for if you want to take a more attack and support-based role. And then you got Taunt. And who doesn't like Taunt? So yeah, we're gonna put Iron Jugulus at like an okay B, and that's where it's gonna sit. We got Ho-Oh making a reappearance here. It loses a little bit of its X factor because it can no longer as easily justify using Sacred Fire in its main move pool. It's just kind of sitting over here next to Will-O-Wisp as something that you can use, but you're trying to get flying type damage out. So your best flying type damage with Ho-Oh is probably going to be coming from dual Wing Beat. I mean, it hits twice, so it's going to take a little bit longer. But you still have all the same team supporting moves that you did last time, and I mean, Ho-Oh is really more of a support than it is an attacker, but it's a little bit worse at being a flying type, so we have to place Ho-Oh at just like a high C.
And now we got Dragonite, who, if you want to use Dragonite as a flying type, your best bet is to charge up your Terrestrialization with, like, Breaking Swipe, for example, and then get off your Tera Flying Tera Blast, which is, like, pretty decent damage. In the grand scheme of all the flying types, it's not so great, but it's pretty decent. And you've also got good defensive tools like Light Screen and Roost for healing yourself, and then you also have Dragon Dance for increasing your damage, and then you have some supporting moves like Helping Hand and Dragon Cheer if you can manage to be in with a bunch of other dragons who are also trying to do flying type damage. You've also got Multiscale, which, I mean, you can't really go wrong with using it in a Tera raid. I would really like to rank Dragonite higher, but I mean, its moveset isn't that great, especially since, let me just double check this, but I'm pretty sure they did not give it dual Wing Beat. Yeah, they didn't give it dual Wing Beat back this generation, which is an absolute crime in my opinion, but that's a topic for another day. But with where Dragonite currently stands, I have to give Dragonite a C tier.
Ice types!
So starting off Ice, we have Calyrex Ice Rider form. And I mean, this thing has Glacial Lance, which is the strongest Ice-type move in the game, and has absolutely no drawbacks, so... as well as you've got Swords Dance to increase your physical damage, you also have Life Dew to heal yourself a little bit, just in case. You've also got Life Dew to heal yourself and your team a little bit, as well as Stat Dropping and Snarl, which is alright. You got your dual screens, and you also have Pollen Puff to heal your teammates, but you really shouldn't be working with your teammates too much on this team, because you're Calyrex Ice, like, why do you care? Surprisingly though, your abilities don't actually do anything, even though you have two of them. I mean, I guess you could run like another Ice type move and then side click into one of your allies in order to get your Chilling Neigh to activate. But like, you have Swords Dance, so if you do that, you're just mean. So yeah, we're gonna place Calyrex Ice as a solid A.
Frostmoth is the same as when we talked about it during Bug Attackers, except now instead of Bug Buzz it is Ice Beam. And even though it does exactly the same things, it's kind of like the best special attacking ice type just because of all the different stuff that it can do.
bumps it up in terms of ice types to being an A. It is still a B in terms of everything else, but in terms of ice types, I'd give it an A.
Now, the thing about Titan is that you are a belly drum user. However, I feel like Titan is kind of like the worst belly drum user, just because, like, I know we're doing ice types and everything. It's just that, like, ice doesn't have any resistances, so you can't resist whatever attack is about to hit you now that you're at +6 attack. And also, you're, like, kind of slow, so it's probably gonna hit you again. And also, your defenses are very low. You just have a lot of HP, but if you're cutting down half of your HP, you're still gonna take a pretty big hit. You do have some resistances in Thick Fat, though. So for whatever reason you bring this to fight a fire type, you can kind of be neutral to it. And if you bring this to fight an ice type, then you're good. You do have some defensive play tools and Charm and Amnesia and Chilling Water. And then you can swap into Avalanche, so you can get a stronger move if you're... Well, Avalanche is negative priority, so you're always going to be slower than whatever you're attacking into, and getting that 120 base power Avalanche is notably stronger than Ice Spinner. But you're also going to be taking the hit every time, guaranteed, so watch out for that. After talking about Calyrex Ice Rider, I'm just kind of like, why talk about any other ice type? But we're gonna put Titan in a B.
I wasn't quite sure what to do about the Kyurem forms, because they're all pretty similar. You'd never use base form. You should really fuse it with Zekrom or Reshiram if you're gonna use it in Tera raids. But like the thing about Kyurem is that it's always not had like a great move pool. I mean, the Kyurem Black literally has a fist made of ice as its left arm, and we can't learn Ice Punch. But because it's the Dragon type, you can play well into Dragon Cheer, and Dragon can give you some decent resistances like Electric, and you're neutral to fire now, but you also resist water and grass. But your Kyurem Black moveset is all going to be physical, so you're going to be using Avalanche, Breaking Swipe, and Dragon Dance. And your Kyurem White set is all going to be special, so you can be using Freeze Dry, Ice Beam, and Dragon Breath. And then both of the Kyurem forms get their dual screens, and you have the Dragon Cheer. And then just so I can go over the Kyurem specific moves, Glaciate is just worse than Freeze Dry, so you wouldn't run it here. And Ice Burn, even though it does have a 30% chance and 140 base power, takes 2 turns to hit, so unless you're running like a Power Herb and healing through some miracle, you're not going to really be running Ice Burn on this Pokemon. Same thing with Kyurem Black and running Freeze Shock. It's a 2-turn move that just doesn't really make sense to run. But even though your moveset is not great, you do at least have a good enough defensive typing to at least justify making you a B tier Ice type. Speaking of Dragon Ice types, we got Excalibur here, our pseudo of Gen 9. It's got, pretty decent moves for an Ice type, all things considered, as that you have the ideal physical setup, which is Swords Dance and Focus Energy to increase your critical hit ratio. You've got Breaking Swipe to save yourself, and you have Icicle Crash, but the main reason for running Excalibur is gonna be your ability Thermal Exchange, which you could justify running Excalibur into something that has a fire type move. If it's like a kind of a weak one, and it's gonna be increasing your attack every turn, and instead of going Ice Tera and becoming weak to the fire type move, you can just keep Stellar Tera on, and now you're neutral to the fire type for the rest of the time. But yeah, this set has kind of brought my energy levels back up, and I'm willing to give this a pretty solid B. Maybe even an A, but for now it's a B. And here we have Ice-Skew, which is really close to Greedent in terms of like gimmickiness, because in case you don't know what an Ice-Skew does, it has this ability called Ice Face, where it takes 0 damage from the first hit that it takes, the first physical hit that is. Which means that you can belly drum with it like pretty safely and then only lose half your health. And then now you're at +6, you can click Ice Spinner into things, and you get faster whenever your Ice Face breaks. Yeah, you can see here that you actually get a lot faster whenever Ice Face is broken. However, after that, your defense is really bad, so you're kind of stuck. Unless, of course, in the future we figure out some way to reactivate the Ice Face like more consistently, because you'd have to, like, after the first Snowscape that you set up, you get your Ice Face back. Like, it's really
really gimmicky. You have Aqua Ring and Chilling Water and Amnesia and Iron Defense, but those don't really help here. And the main reason that I'm putting Ice Cube here is because of the gimmick, which it might help at some point in some really specific niche Tera raid, and I wanted to talk about at least one more ice type, and it ended up being Ice Cube. So we're gonna put Ice Cube with the C grade, and that's all I gotta say about Ice Cube. Dragon types. So Dragons is gonna be a real who's who of Pokemon that we've already gone over here for a sec. So, coming back around to Gouging Fire, we really don't have too much of a change. It's just that now instead of your Sunny Day activating your Photosynthesis and giving your Fire-type damage moves a boost, you're not getting a boost on your damage moves. So you lose a little bit of your X Factor and technically a little bit in offense, but not enough to dip the bar down. But this slight change to your moves, I mean, you get rid of all the other Fire-type moves in here, but you also, having Dragon Cheer is not so special because every other Dragon type that we're about to discuss has Dragon Cheer, I'm pretty sure. So this is enough to move Gouging Fire down to just being considered an A tier in regards to dealing dragon damage. So Hydrapple is one of our returning ones that actually has a kind of notable change. I mean, you're losing Giga Drain, so you're just kind of worse overall. But you do have Fickle Beam, which 30% of the time will be a 160 base power move. And that's pretty notable if you're going to be using all 8 of them during a Tera raid. You have a pretty good chance there. But you might need to run 2 Dragon-type moves, because I don't know if Fickle Beam's going to get you all the way through the Tera raid. Just like, replace one of your defensive options with the old Dragon Pulse. And, I mean, you still have all your berry stuff from when we talked about it before, so pretty much the same, just a tad bit worse. And just being a tad bit worse is going to push it down into being an A grade. Miraidon takes a pretty noticeable dip whenever you're only dealing Dragon-type damage because you lose Parabolic Charge, which is the main way that you would heal yourself. But, like, you still have Hadron Engine, which doesn't boost the power of your Electric-type moves, but it boosts the power of all your moves, which is still okay. And yeah, other than that, the moveset is still the same. You can still be running Charge Beam in case you want to boost your special attack to get your Tera off that way, but when you're trying to run this Pokemon with only Dragon-type damage, you're just like a low A. Hisuian Gudra is exactly the same as last time, except instead of running Flash Cannon, we're now running Dragon Pulse, which Dragon Pulse doesn't have a secondary effect. But this time around, we have normal Gudra as well, who does pretty much exactly the same thing, except you don't have Shell Armor, you have Hydration. But both of the Gudras are going to be falling into the same place as an A.
Walking Wake loses the advantage of having Hydro Steam getting boosted during Sunny Day, and when its Photosynthesis is active, kind of the same problem as Gouging Fire has with only using Dragon-type damage. So your set's pretty much going to be the same, but with only Dragon-type damage, you're going to dip down into being a B grade.
Palkia here, I think the only Pokemon in Dragon types that actually benefits from going for Dragon-type damage. Mostly because of its signature move, Spatial Rend. If you combine that with Dragon Cheer, even if you're terrestrialized into something that's not a dragon for whatever reason, you get 100% crit, which is pretty good. But even though Palkia does get better, we're going to have to be putting it just a B.
Finally gonna get some fresh new faces here. We got Latios and Latios at the same spot because they pretty much are exactly the same. It's just that Latios is bulkier than Latios, so Latios is a little bit better in most scenarios, as Latios trades off some of its defenses to have a higher special attack stat. But your move pool is alright. In terms of Dragon-type damage, you've got the Dragon Pulse, you've got Calm Mind, you've got Chilling Water, you do have Manual Recover, and you can run the Soul Dew, which is alright. I mean, it's a free boost for your Dragon-type moves, so you can't complain about that. Since you're a Psychic-type, you've also got your dual screens, and you've got Dragon Cheer, and then you do have Charm to double drop whenever Terra Shield isn't up. And Latios is looking pretty much the same, except Latios' signature move is usable whenever it is a Dragon type, because Luster Purge can drop the special defense of something through Shield. So even if you're trying to use Latios for Dragon damage with the Dragon Pulse, you can still justify using Luster Purge with Latios, and that also further justifies you using the Soul Dew, especially on Latios. Again, you can only really run Soldew if your recover is healing yourself back enough. Because if you're not healing up enough and you keep getting knocked out, then you are going to need to be running the Shell Bell on Latios and Latios. But all this is to place the two Eons at a high B.
So here we got Regidrago, and I mean, I really didn't want to have to talk about Regidrago, but I feel like I have to do my due diligence to at least mention it, because it does have a nice feature, I guess I should actually say, which is Dragon's Maw, which gives you the 1.5 times boost on all of your Dragon-type moves. And you've got a lot of Dragon-type moves. You can even run physical or special, depending on what you're attacking into. And you've got your dual screens and Dragon Chair. And Dragon Energy would be really, really hard to use, but there are scenarios where you can use it. However, that's where all the nice things about Regidrago stop, is that this thing is only meant to whip out, like, average, like, maybe a little bit higher than average Dragon-type damage, and that is where the good things about Regidrago end. So we're gonna put Regidrago at a C and just leave it behind. And we're kind of doing Koraidon a little dirty here by talking about it first during Dragon types, but that's just how the order worked out. Koraidon's Dragon type move is just enough to, like, qualify as a Tera raid attacker. It's much better whenever you can use its fighting type moves. So now we're just gonna have to put Koraidon at a C.
Poison types.
Starting off Poison, we have a returning Pokemon from when we talked about it in Fire, which is Iron Moth. And Iron Moth swaps out its Fiery Dance for Venoshock, which Fiery Dance could previously give you special attack boost just by using it, but Venoshock can double whenever something is poisoned. So if you're working in collaboration with more poison attackers, then you will deal more damage, and your same moveset still applies here, and it's still really good. But as a poison attacker, the fact that you have Acid Spray makes it so that your X Factor is a little bit less unique, but by all means still enough to give you an S tier. Toxtricity is also going to be returning here, and Toxtricity gets better technically. So instead of running Thunderbolt, you're now running Venoshock, and then you do also have the Sludge Bomb to actually get the poison, so you have a very poison-heavy moveset here with Toxtricity. And your ability plus is a bit more useful here, because back in electric types, Toxtricity had electric terrain to help boost its damage, and so did every other electric type. However, plus makes you a little bit more unique here, because that's an inherent boost to your special attack, which is a little bit harder to get in poison types, and that combined with your full poison type moveset is enough to bump you up to being an S grade with Toxtricity. Pecharunt is a really interesting one, just because you have a lot of unique stuff here. Malignant Chain is a very powerful move that has a 50% chance to badly poison, which is very valuable, as well as you have the Nasty Plot to boost yourself offensively, and Acid Spray to decrease the special defense of anything that you come up against. Is pretty much all the poison types that we're about to discuss through, but man, Acid Spray is good. Then you also have Recover for self-healing, just in case you're not healing enough from your Shell Bell. And then you also have some moves that you can sub in for fake tiers, just in case you can't use Acid Spray, even though you really should just be using Acid Spray. And then we also have Venoshock for if you get your poison off, then you can double your damage with the Venoshock. And we also have Parting Shot, just because there's not a lot of defensive play on Pecharunt. Some early game defensive play with the Parting Shot to lower the attack and special attack of whatever you're fighting can be handy. Poison Puppeteer is a bit of a hit or miss ability, just because Confusion really isn't that helpful in Tera raids. It might buy you like an extra turn or two on something random, but then you have to wait for the Tera raid boss Pokemon to clear its own poison in order to be able to get Poison Puppeteer to activate again. So it's definitely not a detriment, but it's not the most helpful thing in the world. But still, I don't want you to feel like I'm underselling Pecharunt. Like, Pecharunt is a very high A in terms of poison types. Clodsire is exactly the same as last time, except instead of Earthquake, we have Poison Jab. But the main reason that you're bringing Clodsire is because of that Unaware ability. So again, we're just gonna slap Clodsire in the A spot. Vileplume is a little bit harder to use for just the poison moves, because you're losing out on Giga Drain, which heals you every time you use it. Now you can only count on the recovery from the Strength Sap and the recovery from your Shell Bell. I just took a second to include, like, you do have Moonlight and Synthesis, but if you're using Moonlight and Synthesis over the damage that you're healing back from your Shell Bell and Sludge Bomb with Acid Spray, you're probably not using Poison Vile Plume very effectively. Not saying that there's not scenarios where Moonlight and Synthesis come into play, it's just they'll not come up very often. But even though it's a little bit worse, Vile Plume is still deserving of an A. Tentacruel's really not seeing much of a move pool shakeup here. The main thing is just that it's running poison moves in place of its previous water moves, and, Venoshock again. But even though it loses a little bit of X Factor compared to all the other poison types, we're still going to be putting Tentacruel at an A. I think this is the first group of mons that we're going to be talking about independently before we talk about them as a group. But here we have the Galarian versions of Slowbro and Slowking, and they're both pretty similar. It's just that Slowbro is a little bit more complicated than Slowking, and that's because you can choose to run Slowbro both physical or special. If you're going physical, then you're going to be using Curse or... Belly Drum. Belly Drum is the other thing that you can do with Galarian Slowbro here. But Shell Sidearm has a unique property where it can be a physical move or a special move depending on which is stronger. So instead of going Belly Drum and Curse, you could just be using Nasty Plot, and then that works in combination with your Acid Spray here. If you are going to go with the physical Belly Drum set, don't bother running Acid Spray. You can just afford to use like Chilling Water instead. You know what, actually, I think this is the first time that I'm going to do this mid-review. But we're going to bump up the X Factor a little bit there on the right. Just because I forgot to mention Belly Drum here. I really should have had a second set for Slowbro made out where I had all the physical stuff and all the special stuff. But Slowbro, you're getting bumped up a bar. It doesn't bump you up a grade, but you get bumped up a bar. So enjoy that while you can. And then Slowking Galar deserves to go back down a bar on the X Factor, but I'm too lazy to change it. So, you got Sludge Wave, you got the Nasty Plots, you got the Slack Offs, and you've got the Acid Spray, which is pretty good. Your ability doesn't really do much for you, so that's why your X Factor is pretty low. But you're still a Poison type with Acid Spray, so you're still getting an A. Pheasantipity was almost one I was going to throw out here, just because we have so many Acid Spray mons. However, Pheasantipity does do a bit to stand out compared to all the other ones. We do have the Toxic Chain ability, which every time you land your hit, you have a 30% chance of badly poisoning, which in combination with clicking Acid Spray 3 times to get it down to minimum special defense, along with clicking Venoshock, which would probably double whenever your Toxic Chain activates. It's a good start, and then we also have some pretty good moves in Calm Mind, and we also have the Nasty Plot for boosting our offense and special defense. We also have Roost as a healing move, and we also have Light Screen. No Reflect on this one, only Light Screen, but with that defense stat, you really shouldn't bring this in to fight physical attackers. We do have Charm, though. We also have the Taunt for negating some status moves, and we could also go with a different kind of physical set, where instead of using your Toxic Chain ability, you can instead go for Technician, and you can use the move Poison Tail, which has 50 base power, but that's raised to 60 whenever you get to Terrestrialize to Poison, because that's a property of Terrestrialization. And then that 60 is multiplied by 1.5 because of Technician, which makes it a base power 90 move, which is actually stronger than Poison Jab and has a chance to crit. For supporting the physical moveset, we have Swords Dance, and then you could also put Gunk Shot on as another physical move to use, even though it's a little bit more inaccurate. It does give you a little bit more power. But yeah, I'm glad I went back to Pheasantipity because I think that this is another solid A mention right here. Maybe not the physical set. The physical set might be a B, but the overall Pheasantipity is an A.
Okie dokies here because I wanted to talk about a physical poison type. Mostly just a poison type that doesn't have Acid Spray, but Okie dokies still got a lot of cool stuff. You got your Poison Jab for your main physical damage move, nothing special. Then you have the Bulk Up, you have Snarl, and then Rest is going to be a pretty good source of healing outside your Shell Bell. But you also have Howl, and Howl is a great team synergy move for increasing the damage of everybody, as well as also you got the Taunt. You can run Drain Punch if the healing from your Shell Bell or the Rest isn't working out for whatever reason. And then being one of the level 3, you also have Toxic Chain, which gives you a 30% chance of badly poisoning, which badly poisoning really isn't that handy for Tera raids. You tend to want like a burn or a para instead of a poison, but poison helps out a lot of the other poison type attackers because of Venoshock, so as unfortunate as it may be, I think Okidogi is going to be our only B for poison types, and it's really, we have so many A's, it's really not worth mentioning the C's. Fairy types. Starting off fairy types, we have the Lord of Death returning, but now it's better because this time it has a healing move as its damage move, so we are about to discuss a vast sea of fairy types that have Draining Kiss. However, Magearna is Magearna, and Magearna is an easy S. Clefable is a pretty fun one to talk about here. Clefable is the only fairy type with Unaware, so that means that Clefable automatically has a very reserved spot. But everything else does is pretty basic. You got your Draining Kiss, but you have your Calm Mind for supporting your special defense and your special attack, as well as you also have self-healing in the forms of Moonlight and Life Dew. We also have some defensive tools in the form of Charm, Chilling Water, and Amnesia, and offense in the form of Fake Tears. And you can also run Heal Pulse if you're going with a more support-based set, so that way you can heal up your allies. And you can even warrant running Alluring Voice since it is one of your stab moves. You don't necessarily have to run Unaware with Clefable. If you're using the stat dropping ones, you really shouldn't be using Unaware, but Magic Guard is pretty good, but most of the damage that you're taking in Tera raids is coming from direct attacks, so if you are going to go with the Magic Guard option, it's mostly just because you want to use these stat drop moves to the best of their efficiency. Since your main healing move, Draining Kiss, will only go up to 60 base power once you're terastallized into Fairy, it's not actually very strong, but you get 75% healing of the damage that you've dealt, so it's the main move that all the Fairy types are going to be running, which is nothing special, and Clefable especially doesn't have great offensive tools, you just have Calm Mind and Fake Tears. But overall, this is still enough to give Clefable an S tier.
Enamorus is a really interesting one just because there's a lot that you can do with Enamorus. Enamorus is the only fairy contrary user, and I'm pretty sure the only moves that you can use contrary with are the Superpower and the Tera Blast, so you can increase your attack and defense by using Superpower, and whenever you're Stellar Tera, you can increase your attack and special attack by using Stellar Tera Blast. And then both of these two can support your main fairy damaging move, which is going to be Play Rough. And you do have some pretty good swap out moves, starting with Mystical Fire, which can lower your opponent's special attack stat, making it a little bit easier to survive with your not great special defense. And then you could also swap out your contrary to be Cute Charm, which is not a very helpful ability, but it does allow you to use things like Calm Mind and Iron Defense. And if you're not going physical, you can then use Draining Kiss, and you can also have your signature move, Springtide Storm, which has a 30% chance to lower the attack by 1 in case you're attacking a physical attacker, and is also quite powerful. And all of this comes together to give Enamorus a very, very high A grade.
Katarina is quite good because on paper it feels really, really strong. You got Draining Kiss, Calm Mind, you've got Mystical Fire and Nuzzle for paralyzing and special attack dropping. Psychic type, so you've got your dual screens, but you also have the Life Dew for supporting yourself and healing your teammates. As well as you have your signature move Magic Powder, which changes target's type to Psychic, which you cannot use it on the Tera Raid boss Pokemon since terastallized Pokemon cannot have their type changed. But there's definitely some niche scenarios where changing a Pokemon's type to just being pure Psychic is advantageous, so it's worth being talked about here at least. As well as you have some other good tech moves like Heal Pulse for healing your allies again, and you have Charm for lowering attack whenever the Tera Shield isn't up, and you have Skill Swap. The main ability that you're going to want to be using is Magic Bounce, since it bounces back all types of the status moves like Thunder Wave. Hatterene just flat out cannot be hit by them with Magic Bounce, and it also causes them to be cast on the user, which is very handy. And all of this is enough to make Hatterene a very good A relative to fairy types. Primarina coming back around to discuss its fairy typing, and even though you do get a healing move in the form of Draining Kiss, Primarina is just kinda worse as a water type overall because your abilities don't do anything for you. But even though we're worse, we're going to be sitting at a low A with Primarina, probably the lowest A out of this entire video. Flutter Mane is worth giving a mention just because its strong special attack combined if you can get the photosynthesis off during Sun like we did during Charizard raids. Flutter Mane was very good during then. You can get out some pretty consistent coverage with your Draining Kiss, and you have the Calm Mind, you have the Mystical Fire. You really only want to be bringing in Flutter Mane to fight special attackers, because while you can swap out one of your moves like Mystical Fire for something such as Charm, your physical defense stat is so low that you really shouldn't be bringing Flutter Mane to fight physical attackers. I initially had Flutter Mane ranked a little bit higher, but we're going to put Flutter Mane at a B grade relative to all the fairy types.
Serendipity is getting a good bit of a changed up since we talked about it during poison types. Main difference is that all of your tools towards doing poison things don't help here, like badly poisoning something with Toxic Chain really isn't that helpful. It's just that since we're the only real fairy type with Acid Spray here, we kind of have our own niche carved out. Even though we don't have all the cool fairy type things like Draining Kiss, Moonblast is still pretty good. As well as you still have all the good swap out options from before, like Nasty Plot, your Light Screen, your Taunt, and your Charm, so we're going to be putting Pheasantipity at a B. Azumarill is probably our best example of how, even though a Pokemon doesn't really change its moveset, the damage for different types completely changes how well a Pokemon does within that type, because there's a lot more competition for the Fairy type damage than there was in Water type damage. And because of that, we're going to have to put Azumarill's kit at just a B. Tinkaton does get a bit worse here as we're losing Gigaton Hammer, which is our main reason for running it in Steel type, just getting that really strong Steel type damage. But Play Rough isn't bad, but it's just not Gigaton Hammer. As well as we still have all the previous options, except now instead of whatever I had before in this slot, we have Draining Kiss. And our special attack can be higher than our attack on Tinkaton, depending on how you train the Tinkaton, but you're a little bit better off if you're going with your physical Tinkaton. So we're going to be putting Tinkaton at a grade of B.
Comfey is an interesting one. The only reason we're really talking about Comfey is because it serves as more as a healer, but definitely is warranted talking about as an attacker. Because your Draining Kiss and your Calm Mind and your Light Screen are all not bad in terms of getting out your special damage and making sure that you stay alive. And then you also have Synthesis for healing yourself outside of the Draining Kiss, and then you also have some pretty good swapping options in the Taunt and the Charm. And your signature move, Floral Healing, is pretty much just Heal Pulse in most scenarios. But your signature ability, Triage, is not actually that helpful in Tera raids, as speed doesn't really matter that much since you'll be getting attacked at the end of the turn anyways. So even though Comfey is pretty unremarkable in most regards, it does have enough team synergy to be worth mentioning as just a C in Fairy.
Diancie here is something that I kinda wanted to mention during rock types, but I thought it was better to just keep rock types very simple. So Diancie does all the similar things that we've seen fairy types... Wait, forget about this being here. Diancie does a lot of the similar things that we've seen previous fairy types do. We have the Draining Kiss and the Calm Mind, and we have Iron Defense to support us on the physical side, as well as we have our dual screens, the swap-in moves, and we also have our signature move Diamond Storm, which every time you use it has a 50% chance to raise your defense by 2, which is pretty good. But that's where Diancie kind of stops being really good. It doesn't really have much to differentiate itself from other fairy types, other than maybe its clear body ability, which negates stat drops. But other than that, there's not really much that I can do for Diancie to get it over just being a C.
Ghost types! Now, as we're entering ghost types, we finally get to talk about the Monkey. Annihilape is, I want to say, like, very, 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 very close to being a top contender of all Tera raid Pokemon. Like, it's maybe like 1% off of being there just because its defenses could be a little bit better. But the reason why Annihilape is so good, and we'll talk about it later in fighting, but the reason it is specifically so very, very good in Ghost is because Rage Fist. Rage Fist initially starts out a 50 base power move, however every time that you are hit up to a maximum of 6 hits, the base power of this move increases, and this effect carries over even if Annihilate gets KO'd during the Tera raid. Which means that with the extremely high base power that this Rage Fist is maxing out at, and your combination of your bulk up to increase your physical attack, your focus energy to help you guarantee crits on your Rage Fist, and Screech to lower physical defense whenever Terra Shield isn't up, you're good, like, pretty much all the time with just Annihilate Rage Fist, because you'll just deal so much damage and then get all of your health back with your Shell Bell. Your Defiant ability is also very useful for something is trying to lower your attack. You can actually get an attack increase instead. This also goes for any other defense, special defense, speed drops, any drops, you just get a Defiant boost and then you go crazy. And then you do have the Drain Punch to help heal yourself, and you also have the tech move Coaching, which I don't think I want to delve into too much here, but Coaching is a really good move to have if you want to work together in a group with other Pokemon that are physical attackers, and you all go for Coaching with each other and max out your attack in like 2 turns. But yeah, Rage Fist is just so incredibly powerful that you could probably even have scenarios where you just run Primeape. Hold on, let me make a Primeape set real quick. Yeah, Rage Fist is just so good that it even makes Primeape with Eviolite viable for dealing ghost type damage. Even though it in and of itself is not a ghost type, I could definitely see this Primeape set being pretty funny. So yeah, we're going to be placing Annihilate as a super duper easy S grade Pokemon. If you do not have one of these built, build one. Next up we have Golden Go, and Golden Go doesn't really change much. Now we're just running Shadow Ball instead of Flash Cannon. So we're going to be putting Golden Go at a grade of A. Petra Rut is one that I wanted to say gets worse whenever you're not trying to go for straight poison damage, but then I realized that, let's just go over to the second set here, that Hex is a ghost type move, and Hex is really strong whenever you're attacking something that can be statused, and Malignant Chain is pretty good at statusing things, so your Poison Puppeteer does still come into play here, it's just not as important. But with you swapping out your main move for Shadow Ball or Hex, depending on what you're using, this is still pretty good and is still worth an A.
Main reason you're running Calyrex Shadow is because of its signature move Astral Barrage, which is a 120 base power move with no drawbacks whatsoever. Then your moveset is also pretty fleshed out with Calm Mind, you have Draining Kiss for if you need recovery for whatever you're fighting. You also have Life Dew for recovery. You also have good swap-in options for whatever reason you want to try and get the special defense drops with Shadow Ball, as well as you have Hex, which when doubled is 10 more base power than Astral Barrage. We also have Nasty Plot for offense, we have Will-O-Wisp for physical attack defense, we have dual screens because we're the Psychic type, we have the Pollen Puff for healing your allies, and we also have Snarl for decreasing special attack. So yeah, from all this, Calyrex Shadow is a pretty easy A grade.
Skeletorge is still going to be rocking that Torch Song in its main move pool because Torch Song is just so good in Terra raids. However, it's no longer your main damage output, as since you're going for ghost damage, you're probably going to want to be going for Hex, or you could have the Shadow Ball. Your best form of status here is Will-O-Wisp, however you can't Will-O-Wisp whenever the Terra Shield is up. So you could just have Body Slam on Skeletorge's natural move pool to try and get that 30% para and then start going for the Hexes. But this form of Skeletorge is definitely harder to use than the Fire one, so we're going to be putting Skeletorge at just an A in terms of Ghost. Next up, we got big old legendary Pokemon Lunala here. Moongeist Beam is a pretty good go-to move. It is a little bit low on PP, so you might also have to run one of the more general Ghost-type moves. I think the only ability that it would be beneficial for you to ignore is, like, Purifying Salt on Moongeist Beam. But you got a good supporting move pool for Calm Mind, you got Moonlight for self-healing, you got Will-O-Wisp, which is a pretty good tech move. You also have Charge Beam for increasing your special attack, you've got Cosmic Tower for increasing both of your defenses, you have access to Night Daze to lower something's accuracy through Terra Shield, which is very valuable, and you've also got the Wide Guard to protect yourself and your allies from any spread moves that the Terra Raid Pokemon might be using. And Shadow Shield is just a duplicate of Multiscale, but Shadow Shield is very good. So we're going to be putting Lunala at a pretty good A grade here.
Another pretty basic ghost here is Poltegeist. We got Shadow Ball, we got Calm Mind, we got Strength Stamp, we got Will-O-Wisp. You've all seen these things before. However, we have the skill swap, and this time skill swap is pretty meaningful because you can have weak armor on your Poltegeist, and if you trade weak armor onto something else, it means that every time it gets hit by something in the Tera raid that does damage, its defense is going to be lowered by 1. So while you yourself are not a physical attacker, everything else in the Tera raid can be a physical attacker, and just physical attackers go crazy whenever you're fighting something that has weak armor, and the speed increases is not very important, so it's a very, very good skill swap here with the weak armor. You also have your dual screens, and you have Nasty Plot to swap in for a little bit more damage, but this is still enough to put Poltergeist at like a low A grade. Barrelage is another. I really don't want to spend much time talking about Scarlet because it mostly just gets worse now that we don't have Bitter Blade. You gotta be running Shadow Claw because there's not that many good physical ghost moves. So we're just gonna put Scarlet at a B and we're gonna move on.
This shows another case where it loses a lot of steam from not having its signature move, Matcha Gotcha, as being its main damage move. You can still run it, but you probably don't want to. So when you're looking at just ghost damage on Sinistra, we're gonna be looking at just a B.
Trevenant is another grass ghost that has a pretty notable drop off here because you're losing Horn Leech in favor of Shadow Claw for your ghost damage. You also don't have a way to boost your attack because you can't run Curse because you're going to always be a ghost type. So we're just going to have to put Trevenant at a C with its current kit. Here we got Garantina. Garantina is mostly just here because it's a dragon, so you can use it in combination with other dragons with Dragon Cheer. But you got a pretty basic ghost type moveset with Shadow Ball, Calm Mind, Will-O-Wisp. You do have the Breaking Swipe for lowering physical attack, and you have the Skitter Smack for lowering special attack, so a decent defensive supportive move pool as well. And then Garantina Origin Form is also here. You do have to use the Gristius core in order to get Garantina Origin Form, but there are some scenarios where having the Levitate is definitely handy. It's just that in order to heal yourself, you gotta be running Rest. But Garantina just makes it over the bar and is worth a C grade.
Fighting types. So starting off fighting types here, we have the return of Iron Hands, and even though setting up our electric terrain isn't boosting the power of our electric type moves anymore, now you have Drain Punch, so you can just do whatever you want. I would say that Iron Hands is one of the contenders for the best Tera Raid Pokemon of all time. However, Annihilate kind of beats it in terms of fighting, as we'll talk about here in a second. Rhydon definitely beats it in terms of electric. So unfortunately, if those two Pokemon didn't exist, I think Iron Hands would definitely be a contender for best Tera Raid Pokemon of all time, but we're just gonna put it as an S grade in terms of fighting. Moving on to Annihilate, we have the Drain Punch. I'm pretty sure every fighting type other than the special attackers are just going to be running Drain Punch here, so I'm not going to try to mention it every time. But we're pretty much, I think we're actually exactly the same set, because you can argue for running Rage Fist on your fighting type set because it will be stronger than your Drain Punch at like the very end of the Tera raid. So once you break the Tera Shield using the Drain Punch, you can just go for Rage Fist to finish the fight faster. But again, Annihilate ranks at another easy S. Up next, we got Koraidon, and Koraidon has Collision Course. That's the main reason that you would run Koraidon, is if you want to deal a lot of fighting type damage very quickly in combination with either Sword Stance and your Aura Calcum Pulse ability, setting up the sun and giving you an attack boost. It's a lot of fighting type damage very fast. And of course, you also have the Drain Punch to heal yourself, and you have some supporting moves like Breaking Swipe, Bulk Up, Taunt. You have the Dragon Cheer for working together with other dragons, you have Mud Slap, and you have Snarl. So a lot of good options here on Koraidon. The only downside to Koraidon is that sometimes the sun can work against you and your teammates, so you need to know when you need to bring the sun. Otherwise, just use one of the other fighting types that we've talked about here in this video. But Koraidon is still really good and good enough to get like a low S grade.
Chestnut is the same, except now you just have this. But your synergy goes up because you're hopefully fighting with a bunch of other fighting types, so it's easier to use coaching rather than when you were just grass, and there's mostly all the grass attackers are just special attackers. So we're going to be putting Chestnut at an A. Poliwrath does the same thing as Chestnut, where it just swaps its main move for being the move. So we're going to be putting Poliwrath at a grade of A. Here we have a bit of a change up with Gallade, where the move is not your primary fighting type move. You're actually going to be wanting to use Sacred Sword most of the time, because Sacred Sword not only ignores the opposing stat changes, so if you need to fight something like For example, like 7-star Blastoise would use Iron Defense. If you want to fight a Steel type and cut through its defense boost, then you would be using Sacred Sword with Gallade. And your Sharpness ability gives you a free Choice Band boost on cutting moves, and Sacred Sword is a cutting move. So you're going to be dealing your most fighting type damage with your Sacred Sword on Gallade. And then you also have the move. You have Sword Stance to increase your physical attack. You have Mystical Fire as a tech move to put on to decrease special attacks of things that you might be fighting. As well as you have some other good supporting moves in Bulk Up. You've got your dual screens. You've got Will-O-Wisp. You have Charm. You have Life Dew for healing the team, which gives you most of your team synergy. But you also have Wide Guard. But yeah, there's a lot of areas where Gallade can excel where other fighting types do not, so we're going to be putting Gallade in a solid A. Infernape is also pretty much the same, except now instead of running Fire Punch, you run the move as your main damaging move. Coaching is a little bit more useful, again, because most of the top fire attackers were special attackers, but now we have a pretty much all just physical attackers for fighting. You are a little bit more on the frailer side compared to all the other physical attackers, though, so we're going to be putting Infernape at just like a high B. Now, you have to have a fighting special attacker in here somewhere, and the best bet that you're going to get is probably Iron Valiant with Aura Sphere. You have the Calm Mind for setup, you have the Electric Terrain to activate your ability, and then you also have the Light Screen, and I'm guessing I didn't make a second set, so we do have Reflect. That's good. And then you can have like a physical Valiant set where you run the move. However, the thing that makes Iron Valiant stand out is the fact that it's your best bet to deal special fighting type damage if you need special fighting type damage. And for that, we're going to be putting Iron Valiant at a grade of B. Conkeldurr is an interesting one to talk about because all the previous fighting types that we've talked about work pretty well together with each other. However, Conkeldurr is really more of like a one Pokemon fighting machine because you wait for a turn to get your guts off and then you just start whipping out insane drain punches. And you also have some other things that you can do while you're waiting for your guts to activate, like you can click Bulk Up and Focus Energy, and you can Wide Guard for whatever reason. But like, once you get your guts from your Flame Orb, you're just going to want to click Drain Punch into everything and not necessarily care about what everybody else is doing. Even though you could swap Wide Guard out for Coaching, Conkeldurr's probably not a Pokemon that you would generally have Coaching on. So we're going to be putting Conkeldurr at a B spot, despite what the bars in the top right corner might say. Phalanx pretty much only has a niche carved out for itself because of its signature move, No Retreat, which comes into play with the strategy that we'll be talking about a little bit later on. But with No Retreat, you just get... The only thing that's really valuable from the No Retreat is your attack increase and one of the defensive boost into whatever you're fighting. Or both of them if you're fighting a mixed attacker, but that's not really common. And then Brick Break is going to be your main fighting type move, which isn't that good. But you do have the Focus Energy for increasing your critical hit rate, and you have the Rock Smash. So overall, Phalanx it's doing alright for itself. It's got a little niche carved out, but that niche is not super applicable, so we're just going to place Phalanx at a C. Toxicroak is really only here because of its dry skin ability that allows it to be immune to water and also get healed whenever rain is up. It's not the worst move pool. You got Mud Slap, you got Chilling Water, you got your Sword Stance, you got the move. So it's worth at least giving Toxicroak a mention with it being like a C grade. Both of the Urshifus just utilize the same moveset. It's just the move, Sword Stance, Coaching, and Focus Energy. And their secondary types are the only reasons why you would bring the different ones of them. But the Urshifus are really not that great when compared to all the other fighting types that we've already talked about. So we're just going to be putting the Urshifus at a C. There are 3 moves that just kind of warp how to approach Tera raids because they play differently than most other moves, and each of the last 3 types that I'm talking about has one of these moves. The first move that I already mentioned on a random set somewhere is Body Press, which allows you to use your physical defense stat as your attacking stat. Body Press is advantageous because all you need to support yourself is a defense increasing move or strategy, and a way to heal yourself, and you practically become invincible to physical attackers. The 3 main ways that you can use Body Press is just to go Body Press, Iron Defense, and Healing move, but some Pokemon are able to use an ability such as Stamina, which will increase your defense every time that you're hit. Then you just go Body Press, Iron Defense, you can have Reflect in your move pool, and then you can have Rest. And then the third way is Zamazenta kind of represents using group defense boosting. which is really just coaching. But on screen are all the Pokemon that can use Body Press in some meaningful way, so look over their movesets and you should be able to figure out how they work with specifically Body Press in mind.
Psychic types. Armor is pretty much the same as when we talked about it in fire types, except in psychic types, fire type is a little bit more of a useful defensive type. The entire moveset is pretty much the same. You can even still use mystical fire if you want to drop the special attack of whatever you're fighting so that you can have more survivability, but I mean, you still got acid spray, and acid spray is not too common among psychic types, so you're going to be sitting at a pretty good A grade. Calyrex Shadow kind of covers both of the Calyrexes because there's not great physical psychic moves on Calyrex Ice, but Calyrex Shadow is losing Astral Barrage for just basic psychic, and you also have the Psyshock now. But I mean, you're still Calyrex Shadow, so your special attack is pretty off the charts. You've still got a pretty great supporting move pool, so we're going to be putting Calyrex Shadow at a grade of A. Latios and Latios get noticeably better now that we're using their signature moves, and their signature moves are pretty strong, but also have a pretty good secondary effect where you have a 50% chance to lower special attack by 1 for Latios, and Latios' Luster Purge will lower special defense by 1. Latios is a little bit more useful because it kind of serves as like a quarter of an acid spray, but still good. So we're going to be putting Latios and Latios at a solid A in terms of psychic. Glade changes up a little bit here, because now that we don't have Sacred Sword, we're running Psycho Cut instead, and Psycho Cut is a little bit weaker, and in order to ignore defense drops, you have to be getting a high critical hit ratio, which means that you should... Oh, we don't have Focus Energy. That's a problem. We also don't have Drain Punch, so we don't have any form of self-healing, but, like, you're still pretty much the same, because there's not a lot of good physical psychic damage in the game, so... Glade gets to carve out a bit of a niche for itself and sits at an A. The main reason that you're going to be bringing Espathra is because of its signature move Lumina Crash, which is Acid Spray but Psychic type and also stronger. You do have some pretty good supporting moves in your Calm Mind, you've got Roost, you've got Mud Slap, you've got your dual screens like all the other Psychic types do, you've got Feather Dance, and you even have Skill Swap in case you want to throw your speed boost onto another Pokemon. Don't throw Opportunist. Opportunist is a really good ability. Use Opportunist for yourself, don't Skill Swap that away. But you can definitely Skill Swap away Frisk though, because ain't nobody using Frisk in Tera raids. But overall, Espathra's signature move is so strong that we can safely put Espathra as an A grade.
Malamar is our last Contrary Mon that we have to go over, and like all the previous Contrary Mons, it is very strong whenever you are using Stellar Tera Blast because you get both an attack and special attack increase. But the other move that you can use with Contrary is Superpower, which will increase your attack and defense, so you can use the superpowers to build up to your Terrestrialization for Tera Stellar and then start clicking Tera Blast. But as a Psychic type, you have Psycho Cut, so you could go for crits, but I mean, probably not. But you also have some good tech moves in Lunge to lower attack by 1. You have Acupressure, which will come into the main Psychic type move here in a sec, but Acupressure is very good. As well as you've got the dual screens, and you also have the tech move Topsy-Turvy, which inverts the stat changes of your target. And this move can be pretty hit or miss most of the time. If you're in lobby with somebody who's throwing by like clicking close combat or overheat or something like that, you can just topsy-turvy them, and then their defense drops will turn into defense boost, and their attack drops will turn into attack boost. But you can also use topsy-turvy to invert a boss Tera Pokemon stat changes, so if it's increasing its defense by +2, then you can make it so that it has minus defense. And if you time it well enough, you can turn your allies boost into stat drops so that it doesn't get wiped away by the Tera Raid Pokemon, and then once the wipe happens, you can turn them back into stat boost. And you know, same thing for the Tera Raid boss Pokemon when it tries to clear its own stats. But that's a little bit riskier because those are stat boost, and if it just hits you and OHKOs you, then you're up a creek without a paddle. But yeah, there's, even out of the Contrary Mons, there really isn't anything that's quite like Malamar in the game, so we're going to be giving Malamar a very, very solid grade of A.
Lunala is a lot less unique when you're comparing it to other Psychic types. You just have to run Psychic instead of your signature move now. But your moveset is defensively is still like really good. But compared to other Psychic types, we're just going to be putting Lunala at like a B grade.
Lugia is pretty much the same as when we talked about it last time, except we don't have our signature move Aeroblast, we just have Psychic. We also have Psyshock though. I don't really know how to end this, but we're just gonna put Lugia at a B. Iron Leaves is a little bit more notable since we talked about it in grass types, because now it gets its signature move, Psyblade, which has a power increase whenever electric terrain is up. So it's easier for you to justify using electric terrain on the Psychic set, which means that you can have your ability and you can have your signature move, which is pretty neat. And it's neat enough to get Iron Leaves into being a B for Psychic types.
Solgaleo only changes because it's losing Sunsteel Strike for Psychic Fangs, which is only a small bit weaker, actually. I forget how strong Psychic Fangs is as a move. But your entire supporting move pool is still the same, and if you're gonna go with Special Solgaleo, then you gotta be using Psychic instead of Flash Cannon, which is a little bit stronger than Flash Cannon. But we're just gonna be putting Solgaleo down as a B.
Articuno has a lot more competition in Psychic types than it did in Flying types, so it's going to be a little bit worse compared to all the other Psychic types. However, you do have your signature move Freezing Glare, which if you can get the freeze off at least once per game, it entirely justifies running Articuno. Also, your competitive makes you a little bit more unique, but not so as much, as there's a lot more boosting that happens in Psychic types. So we're just going to be putting Galarian Articuno at a B. Mewtwo is interesting because it has a wide move pool like Mew does. However, it's harder to justify running Mewtwo whenever Mew exists. You do have more special attack than Mew, and you do have your signature move Psystrike, which is just more powerful Psyshock. So it's probably the best way to make use of Mewtwo's move pool. Mewtwo's abilities also don't do anything in Tera raids, unlike Mew, who has Synchronize. So we're just going to be putting Mewtwo down at a very high B. Cresselia is mainly just here because of its signature move Lunar Blessing, which as a signature move functions like a Life Dew, but also heals any statuses that may occur, which is very good. You also have Moonlight for greater healing, but only for yourself, and you have Calm Mind for boosting your special attack and special defense. Then you also have the Psychic and Psyshock options, which are pretty decent, and you also have Levitate to make yourself immune to ground type moves, which definitely comes up every once in a while. But Lunala is really one of those Pokemon that's more of a healer than an attacker, but you can still use it for the attack, so we're just going to put Lunala down as a low B. And we're just going to put the entire Lake Trio all together, because they all pretty much do the exact same thing. It's just that Azelf is more attack-weighted, Yuxi is more defense-weighted, and Mesprit is the mix between the two. But the signature move Mystical Power functions a lot like Torch Song from Skeletor's, where it raises your special attack guaranteed every time you use it. Other than that, the Lake Trio doesn't really have much going for them. As you can see, I didn't even make like a complete move pool for the Lake Trio because it's just not much to work with here. Like, you've always got your dual screens and like Reflect and Light Screen, but it's just kind of here. Not super top of the class in terms of Psychic, so we're going to be putting these 3 Pokemon at just a C grade. The next 2 Tera breaking moves that I'm going to talk about function in the same way, and the Psychic type one is called Stored Power. This move increases in base power by 20 for every stat boost and has no limit to how strong it can get, except for the fact that you can only have 6 stat boosts in each of the main stats, accuracy and evasion. There are so many stat boosting moves that it would take forever for me to explain all of them in one video, but generally you should be gaining at least 2 boosts per turn with your own moves. You can, however, run mixed sets that work together with other players. For example, if you're going to use moves like Howl or Coaching, that technically you get 4 boosts, but only on 1 Pokemon, or Coaching you get 6 boosts, but you're not giving 1 to yourself. And there are a lot of stat boosting moves. Hone Claws is a good one to have because it's hard to get those accuracy boosts. You could also do something like the Toxtricity here is a little bit of a unique one where we have the Magnetic Flux. So I think you can only work together with other Toxtricities by doing this because Magnetic Flux works just like Coaching does, except it gives the defense and special defense boost for all of your allies with plus or minus. But here in Toxtricity, we also have the Weakness Policy item, and this item, whenever you are hit by a super effective move, raises your attack and special attack stat by 2 stages. However, you don't need the Tera Boss Pokemon that you're fighting to have a super effective move, as instead you could run something as simple as... actually, if you're running Toxtricity, you can hit each other with, like, the base 20 stored power, and that will activate each other's weakness policies, because you're a poison type. Then again, Magearna might be the best stored Powermon, even though it's not a Psychic type, because Magearna gets Shift Gear, which can increase your speed by 2 and attack by 1, so you're getting 3 boost. And you also have Calm Mind, which doesn't overlap with any of those boosts. And you also have Iron Defense, which again, doesn't overlap with any of the previous boost. And you also have the Soul Heart, which does overlap with your Calm Mind, but your Calm Mind is only giving you a +1 in special attack anyways. But yeah, Stored Power is its own kind of separate thing, and on screen right now is all of the Pokemon that I've determined are Stored Powered users that have their own kind of niche in some way. And there's also going to be supports that are specifically dedicated to helping out Stored Power Mons later on, so look out for that whenever that happens. You can get really creative with how you support Stored Power Mons, trust me.
Dark types.
Malamar stays pretty much the same as when we talked about it before, except now your main physical dark move is going to be Throat Chop, but I mean, it's just that physical dark damage is a lot easier to get than physical psychic type damage, but we're still going to be putting Malamar at a pretty easy A. Samurott pretty much stays like exactly the same as it did in water types, except instead of Razor Shell, you're now using Night Slash, which guarantees the critical hit whenever you're using Focus Energy, and works together with your Sharpness, so not so bad. We're going to be putting Samurott at about a B. King Gambit is the same as when we talked about it during Steel types, except now it has its signature move Kowtow Cleave, which is very strong and doesn't miss. So we're going to be putting King Gambit at a pretty okay B.
Iron Jigglypuff is still the same as when we talked about it in Flying, except now that we're focused on dealing dark type damage, Snarl is also included in that, as it'll get raised to 60 base power whenever you're terastallized into dark. And you can be on your electric terrain, so you won't get put to sleep whenever you terastallize into being a pure dark type, which is epic. Then you've also got the same support moves as before, and I don't think they matter anymore in dark, so we're just gonna be putting Iron Jugulis at a slightly higher B.
Tera Dark Urshifu with Wicked Blow does have its uses for whenever you need to crit something that's creating defensive boost, but it does come up, and it's easier to use than Water Urshifu that has to hit 3 times. So we're going to be putting Dark Urshifu at about a B. The route is still the same, except you don't have grassy terrain anymore. But Jungle Healing is a little bit better, because in Dark types it's a little bit harder to get self-healing, as a lot more of them are just aggressive. It's a little bit harder to multiply your damage, though, without having your terrain boost your damage. So we're still going to be putting Zarude at just a B. Galarian Moltres now gets to use Fiery Wrath, its signature move. However, you can't really make use of its secondary effect, so we're just gonna be at the same place that we were last time. But the Dark Tera allows us to get the Tera boost on using Snarl, which is slightly better, but it's still just a B. Alright, I want the record to show that I had ended the video, and then I started looking at the thing that we're going to talk about at the very end here. And I was going to talk about the power trip stuff, and then I realized that I hadn't talked about Incineroar. And like, in terms of dark types, it does have Darkest Lariat, so I probably should talk about Incineroar. Darkest Lariat allows you to ignore any defensive stat changes, as well as evasion, but I don't think any of the Tera Raid Boss Pokemon really use evasion. And you also have a lot of really good supporting moves because you're VGC Cat. So you got the Bulk Up, you have the Parting Shot, you have Will-O-Wisp, you have Drain Punch to heal yourself, you have a Sword Stance, you have Leech Life to heal yourself, you've got the Taunt, you've got Burning Jealousy, and you've got Snarl. As well as your initial Intimidate ability to lower the attack of physical attackers is handy. So we're going to be putting VGC Cat at a low B.
Hydreigon doesn't really have that much that makes it special, but it still has the raw pseudo-legendary stats and the Levitate ability, so there are some scenarios where Hydreigon is a nice build to have. Your move pool isn't absolutely useless. You are a dragon type, so you can work together with the dragon cheer of other dragons. Still a very high C, though. Lastly, we have a Crocodile, who you're mostly going to be running just because of the Anger Point. You can get the Anger Point to proc, then you're in a really good offensive spot with your Dark Crunch here. You also have Bulk Up to wait until that happens, you have Breaking Swipe for lowering attack, you have Mud Slap for decreasing accuracy, although if you decrease accuracy, that decreases the chance of your Anger Point acting because you won't be getting hit. You've also got Skitter Smack and Snarl for lowering special attack, so we're just going to be putting Crocodile at a C, and that should be it for attackers.
And there's no point in beating around the bush with the third move. It's Power Trip. It functions the same way as Stored Power, except it's a physical move that's Dark type instead of a special move that's Psychic type. And for reasons that I can't really pin down, it always feels more difficult to use Power Trip than Stored Power. Even though Power Trip can hit everything, I don't know if it's just that the Power Trip users are just, like, not as good. It probably is that. But Power Trip just always feels like a more difficult strategy to get off. Also, we haven't really had any 7-star Tera raids that have required us to use Power Trip yet. Like, even the Tera Psychic ones usually have a pretty good way to beat Dark types in some form, so we just use other things. But on screen right now are all the Power Trip users. There's not as many of them as Body Press and Stored Power users, so you can kind of see what I mean here. But yeah, still fundamentally just breaks Tera raids. Okay, so before we get into healers and supports, we need to discuss the hardest to place Pokemon out of any of the ones in this video, and that is going to be Smeargle. Smeargle has a gimmick that allows it to use the move Sketch to learn every other move. Pick any move in this video and have Smeargle sketch it onto itself during a double battle, and now you have that move. It's insanely good. Moving into healers, on screen are all the Pokemon that I've already talked about that can easily be considered a healer instead of an attacker if you want to use it that way. But as for Pokemon that we've not talked about, let's first discuss some Life Dew users. Clefairy is like my go-to Life Dew user for whenever I want to deal with physical attackers, just because Clefairy has the Friend Guard ability, which is very nice, and because you are not a fully evolved Pokemon, you can use the Eviolite. And you might be wondering, well, why not use Clefable? The reason that you don't use Clefable here is because of the Eviolite, but also Clefable doesn't have access to Friend Guard if you go back and look at it. So you can afford to make Clefairy very, very physically tanky, and with the options for Charm whenever Tera Shield is not up, and Chilling Water for whenever Tera Shield is up, and you also have the Cosmic Power for increasing your defense and special defense, and you have the Life Dew for healing everybody, Clefairy is a very solid option for just supporting against fighting physical attacking based Tera raids. Kind of on the flip side of that, we have Chansey and Blissey here. Now, Chansey has a very large HP stat, but a very, very low defense stat. So you don't want to bring Chansey in to fight physical attackers. You want to use that pretty good special defense stat and your absolutely terrifying HP stat. To just be clicking things like Life Dew, and you've got the light screen. You can even go for Body Slam if you want to help out by trying to get paralysis, and you can go for the direct healing with that heal pulse, and your ability healer does come up sometimes whenever there's things like sleep or paralysis or Will-O-Wisp in play. And then you are another not fully evolved Mon, so that's the main reason that you would run Chansey over Blissey. But swapping over to Blissey, we free up our item slot so we can run an item such as Light Clay for our light screen here. And then we also have the Life Dew, and then we can also run self-healing in the form of Soft Boiled. And then looking over Blissey's moveset, you still have the same things as Chansey, but you have Electric Terrain in their moveset, which I actually thought was pretty niche. I wish I put Electric Terrain on during Primarina raids. That would have been really helpful. But yeah, Blissey is my go-to special defense tank, so if you don't have a Clefairy or a Blissey and want to be a support, I would definitely start with those two. Coming up next, we got Lapras, and Lapras can do some pretty unique things here. We got the Life Dew, we have the Chilling Water, and we have the Reflect, so we're a pretty good defensive support. And then your abilities in Water Absorb and Shell Armor are also pretty useful. If you want to terrestrialize into something that is weak to water, you can just be immune to it with Water Absorb. And then you also have the Dragon Shear for working with other Dragon-type attackers. And lastly, just another one I wanted to note here, we have Cloyster, and Cloyster has an absolutely terrifying defense stat. I always forget this about Cloyster, that Cloyster has a really high defense stat, and they later nerfed it in Generation 2 by giving it an extremely low special defense stat. But Cloyster actually has some pretty neat tools here. You got the Life Dew, you've got the Razor Shell for lowering the defense through Tera Shield, you've got the Chilling Water, and then you also have the Iron Defense for yourself. So a lot of good options for Cloyster to support itself, but also make it easier to defeat physical attackers with other physical attackers. Now moving into the Pokemon that don't have spread healing but just have direct healing, so the only really notable heal pulse user that we haven't already talked about is Closetser. I was going to talk about Closetser during water types, but we just have so many water types that It kind of falls behind, but Clodsitzer was the first water type that I ever made to fight in Tera raids, so it kind of has a special place in my heart with that water pulse, and in combination with your Mega Launcher ability, it becomes a pretty solid 90 base power move. But if you're also running Heal Pulse on Clodsitzer, it actually makes it so that you're not just healing 50% of whatever you're targeting, you're healing 75% because of your Mega Launcher ability. But other than that, it can be a little difficult to use Clodsitzer, so it's got its own little niche in the fact that it can heal something for 75% of its health. Next up, we got the Pollen Puffers. You got Rabombi here. The main reason you're going to be running Rabombi is because of its sweet availability, which allows things to not have to fall asleep, but you've also got some good support moves in the Aromatic Mist, which it's kind of bad, but it's the only way that you can throw special defense boosting onto something, so in its own way, it's kind of good, but hopefully in the next generation of Pokemon, they buff Aromatic Mist to be the same as, like, Coaching, where it raises everything's special defense in a Tera raid, instead of you just only being able to target one ally. And then to support yourself, you have the Quiver Dance and the Draining Kiss to get your health back, and you have a Citrus Berry. You are a notably frail Pokemon, but if whatever you're fighting isn't exerting too much offensive pressure, you can definitely justify running Rabombi here. Moving on to a Pokemon that's a little bit different than Rabombi, we've got Jumpluff, and Jumpluff loves to use that Cotton Guard to increase its defense by 3 stages, and then just sit on the field and be an absolute physical tank that can heal everything else in the field while also having its own synthesis, and being able to set Reflect every once in a while. It's very good. I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to mention Amoonguss because it is a nice Pollen Puff user, and it does have some unique tools in the fact that it can spore things to put things to sleep. Generally, sleep isn't too useful in Tera Rage, just because since there's 4 moves happening in one turn, the Pokemon's just going to wake up after you use the spore, so you can't really take advantage of it too often. But you also have the Clear Smog for getting rid of any stat boost that a Tera Raid Pokemon might get. So, yeah. Also, the Effect Spore is kind of neat. Like, if you get the 30% chance to paralyze, then you're kind of cooking and you don't have to worry about clicking Spore. Also, this goes without saying, but most healers and supporters don't terrestrialize, so you can run items like Black Sludge that heal you if you don't have a leftovers for whatever reason. And lastly, we have Wo-Chien here. Now, Wo-Chien is probably the hardest one to use out of all the guys here, just because it doesn't have a great way to sustain itself outside of just clicking Giga Drain in grassy terrain. But you are a Pollen Puffer, and your ability is helpful, but if I'm in a raid with you and you bring Wo-Chien, and I'm using a physical attacker and the boss is a special attacker, I will find you. So supports is the hardest part of the video to organize because there are just so many Pokemon that can fit under the wide definition of support Pokemon. These are the general moves that can make a Pokemon more support orientated, so get 3 of them and a way to heal yourself, and congrats, you've made a support. The most important thing for making a good support is defensive typing, so start by looking at what the Tera Raid Pokemon is using, and try to resist 2 out of the 3 of the stab boosted attacks, while being neutral to whatever's left. For the rest of this section, however, I'm going to be directly discussing Pokemon with unique moves or abilities based on how they play along with our already established attackers. First up, we have unique stat boosting and unique stat dropping, and technically Qwilfish, Hisui, and Overqwil aren't unique. They are probably your best bet to work in tandem with the stored power mons, because if you're fighting a physical attacker, you have that Intimidate right off the bat, but you also have Acupressure, and Acupressure is the best general move that you can use to support stored power mons, because the stat boost that it gives them is absolutely random. Like, it can even be evasion or accuracy, and you can't throw evasion or accuracy onto a ally Pokemon in any way other than Acupressure. And the fact that it gives them 2 boost is really, really good. But you also have the Acid Spray for lowering the special defense stat, and you have Minimize to make it so that you can just click Minimize 3 times, and if the Tera Raid Pokemon hits you, it's cringe. Same thing with Hisui and Qwilfish, except instead of the Black Sludge healing you, you can now trade out for an Eviolite to make yourself a little bit tankier. And here we have Overqwil doing pretty much the same thing as its predecessors. However, we also have Barb Barrage, which I probably should have mentioned during Poison Attackers, but I'm too lazy to go back and edit Overqwil into being there now, so I'm going to mention it here. Following that, we have Alchemy, and Alchemy's signature move, Decorate, is a really, really good support move for stored power and power trip mons because it gives them a +4 boost in 2 attack boost and 2 special attack boost. As well as Alchemy just has a lot of good moves in its move pool if you give it a look over. But it also has 2 abilities that are kind of hard to get. We already talked about the Sweet Veil, but Alchemy is probably the best Aroma Veil user. And if you're fighting something that is Taunt in its natural move pool, it can be a little frustrating whenever you want to try and set up on it and it's not letting you, so Aroma Veil's pretty handy. And lastly, this one's a little strange, but we do have Spicy Extract, which raises a target's attack by 2 and lowers its defense by 2, which means that if you are using a foul play strategy against a special attacker, you're going to be doing 4 times the damage each time that you use Spicy Extract. But you can also use Spicy Extract in combination with Pokemon that have the ability like Clear Body, because then you'll get the attack boost, but they won't get the defense drop. And even if you're fighting a special attacker, then you don't care about the defense drop, so you can just Spicy Extract into whatever you want, as long as they're physical attackers. Our next group of mons here all works exactly the same way in the fact that they all just click Entrainment. Now, Entrainment changes the target's ability to match its own. So with Chimecho here, you can use Entrainment and everything flies now. Same idea with Araquanid. You have Water Absorb, so you can Entrainment the Water Absorb onto things, and now they're immune to Water type moves. Palma, you've got Volt Absorb, so you can make things immune to Electric type moves. Hawlucha works slightly differently in the fact that you can put Mold Breaker onto anything, and the Mold Breaker makes it so that you can ignore opposing abilities that would cause them to not take damage, even if they're Tera. So it's helpful for whenever, I don't know, you're fighting a water type and it has Lightning Rod, you can just ignore the Lightning Rod by giving everything in the Tera Raid Mold Breaker if you go in with electric types. And lastly, this one's not as notable as the other 4, but you can just Entrainment Thick Fat onto things in case you're fighting an Ice or Fire type. This group is pretty similar to the last group. We talked about Latios with Simple Beam before, but the other 2 Simple Beam mons are Golduck and Grumpig. Especially Grumpig seems to be pretty popular in supports. But just in case you need a refresher, Simple Beam makes it so that the target's ability becomes Simple, and Simple doubles the amount of stat changes that an opponent gets. So instead of Acid Spray only dropping the special defense by 2, it would instead drop the special defense of a Pokemon with Simple by 4, which means that you only need to use 2 Acid Sprays in order to get a Pokemon down to minimum special defense. You can even use Simple in combination with Stored Power and Power Trip, because now all the stat boosts that the Stored Power and Power Trip mons are getting are doubled, so they're increasing the base power of their moves twice as fast. Here we have the Pokemon that are a bit too frail to be considered attackers, but have pretty notable moves. So Salazzle, not great on the defenses and special defenses SBC, but we're the only Pokemon in the game with Fire Lash, which is a 100% chance to lower the target's defense by 1, and it is a pretty strong physical fire type move. So Salazzle has a pretty nice niche here. Galarian Zapdos works kind of in the same way. Thunderous Kick gives you a 100% chance to lower the target's defense by 1, as well as Hisuian Decidueye's Triple Arrows has a 50% chance to lower the target's defense by 1. However, I didn't put these 2 into fighting types, as compared to all the other fighting types that just click Drain Punch. These 2 are just kind of forgettable, but I at least wanted to mention them here because their 2 signature moves are good enough to warrant running them. It's just that the only reason that you would run them is in more of a support scenario rather than an offensive scenario. Lastly, we have Serena, who has the Drop Kick, which gives a 100% chance to lower the target's attack by 1. And the reason Serena is here is because Hornleech mons are just way better than Serena, so it's hard to justify using Serena, but Drop Kick does give you a bit of a niche, and you also have the Sweet Veil ability. Sitting all by itself here, we have Oranguru, and that is because Oranguru, other than Smeargle, is the only Pokemon in the game that has Instruct. And Instruct is the only move in the game that acts in the way that Instruct does, because what Instruct does is that it allows you to target one Pokemon, and they will use the move that they last moved. And this is very good in combination in Tera Raids, because it allows you, because let's say, for example, we have Oranguru and Skeledirge on the field, and Skeledirge is using Torch Song in order to increase its special attack. Oranguru can then instruct the Skeledirge in order to have it use Torch Song again, and since Skeledirge already previously used Torch Song, It now has a special attack boost into its second Torch Song, and then gets another special attack boost after that. So the Skeledirge is at +2, and because Skeledirge itself isn't the one that moved, if the Skeledirge is using a Shell Bell, that means on the second attack, all of the healing that it gets from the Shell Bell will be absolutely free, as long as Oranguru can support itself with, I think it's just Rest on Oranguru. You gotta be clicking Rest. But Instruct is really nice just to help speed up the setup of Pokemon, and also giving attackers like pretty much just free turns to throw damage at the Tera raid boss. Here we have the group dedicated to solely their abilities. Charjabug is the only Pokemon in the game that has the ability Battery, which adds a 1.3 times multiplier to special attacks. So if you can make a Charjabug set based on all the moves that we've already gone over that works in your Tera raid, it's pretty helpful. As well as you're not a fully evolved Pokemon, so you can justify using the Eviolite. Next up we have Stonejourner, who, because of Power Spot, works very similar to Charjabug, except instead of just only multiplying special attacks, you multiply the base power of every attack. And lastly we have Cramorant, who, when I was making this video, I wasn't really thinking about putting Cramorant anywhere at all, but the power of your Gulp Missile combined with using Surf every turn and either getting a defense drop on something through Terra Shield, or having a paralysis happen, I don't think you can really underestimate that. Even though Cramorant, maybe not the best on the physical side, but your special defense is alright, and your move pool isn't actually so bad with Cramorant. Cramorant is just kinda up there with Ice-Q and Greedent in terms of gimmickiness, so be careful whenever you're bringing a Cramorant to a Tera raid, because you're gonna get some strange looks. I mean, I just went over Cramorant, and if I see somebody bringing a Cramorant, I'm going to give them strange looks.
Alright, well, that's the entire Tera raid set's info dump, and it only took just over 2.5 hours. Yeah, ain't nobody gonna get this far. I'm just gonna keep the timestamps on screen in case someone falls asleep and manages to wake themselves up here at the end. If you did watch all of this video, I'm sorry.